Radio. Tonight, my guest is my buddy Strategic Eyes. If you have not checked out his channel, it's in one of the featured channels of my YouTube channel. You can scroll down and check him out and subscribe there. What you will not find there, unfortunately, is my buddy Neo Unrealist, who is recently removed from YouTube. And he doesn't know why, but it probably has something to do with him covering the Hunter Biden stuff and some other things that are kind of controversial. But they just straight up took his entire channel away.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. They took
Wow.
his they took it, like, they didn't just suspend him, it's gone. So you guys can
Damn.
now find him on Rumble. Neo Unrealist, I've been a fan of his for many years, so if you have not had a chance to check his stuff out, I will be sure to link his Rumble stuff to you. He definitely deserves your support, especially now. But in any case, for those of you, as I always kind of try to bring on people, different that you guys like. I don't know if all of you have seen Strategic Eyes' show or not. Most of our fans, I would say, are kind of in common. But Strategic, why don't you go ahead and take a moment while I'm throwing the link for this everywhere, and tell people what you're about.
Oh, great. Well, first of all, it's always great to talk to you, be a guest on your show, collaborate with you. For those of you who don't know, I know I got a lot of my folks inside of the chat because we kind of linked our live stream together. But I'm Strategic Eyes. I'm an African American police officer. A lot of people say, "Why do you say you're an African American police officer? Why can't you just be a police officer?" Yeah, the, the African American part comes with a different experience, and I use that experience to basically be a law enforcement communicator. And the purpose of my channel is to kind of bridge that gap and bring us together. We talk about race, we talk about police involved interactions, we talk about almost everything. But the underlying premise of the show is, how do we get past this racial strife and become one American, solve these things together? So I'm a divider, or rather, I'm a bring people together type of guy and not a divider. And that's what I do on YouTube. So, I hope you help this small growing channel because of what we talk about on my channel. We kind of get done dirty by the algorithm. And so therefore it's slow motion, and it's a hard ground-based fight to get subscribers and grow the channel. But we're doing our thing, and we get there. And if you're not ready yet, I'll just say real quick, what is my qualifications to be here? Because anybody can, not anybody, but it is accessible. You can easily become a police officer. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can somehow have authority on some of these conversations that happen, and these news stories. My history is, I worked for the New York State Department of Corrections for 12 years, and for 9 or 10 of those years, I was a sex crimes investigator in internal affairs, and I did that for a very long time. I locked a lot of officers up for sexual misconduct. I worked a lot of cases with the U.S. Justice Department, the district attorneys in the areas, mostly in the Mid Hudson region, and etc. And then I left that to become a police officer for a police agency in New York. And so now I have both of those experiences. And now I'm a street cop. I'm out there fighting crime and trying to get guns off the streets, etc. And hey, man, I'm loving every bit of it. And I love serving the people. And most importantly, I love talking to you folks.
Yeah, you've definitely. It's funny, for those of you guys who weren't around for it, how I met him was like he was playing one of my videos, and reacting to it, and I was like, man, you can play the whole thing if you want, because I don't mind that stuff. It was about that. I can't remember the dude's name, but it was the one who like made that Twitter video or whatever about like knowing that there were people in the Kyle Rittenhouse, like that they knew people that were in the jury or something, and then like he
Right.
also like went to that judge's door.
Yeah.
like
It's
like what
crazy.
are you doing? It was like, that was crazy. Do you want to tell them about that real quick?
Yeah, I mean, well, I got a little distracted because I got a $5 super chat. Let me just read that out real quick.
Go
Lucifer
ahead, go
Doman
ahead.
says, I'm painting figures while listening. When can we get together to paint on Discord? Lucifer Doman has been trying to get me to paint 40K action figures with her for a while now. So, Lucifer, it looks like we're gonna try and fit it in for tomorrow sometime. So if you're with it, tomorrow I'll try and figure it and fit in sometime so we can paint some figures. So there was like a fake cousin or something, or nephew of George Floyd, and
Right.
like he's like going to this judge's house to basically intimidate the judge to allow cameras inside of the proceedings, which is something I agree with as far as having cameras in the proceedings. But intimidating a judge is never a way to go about it. And this guy, I saw you make a video on that, I believe,
Yep.
and I was like, this video is so awesome. I got to use it. And so I used it, and then I gave you the credit, and that's how we connected, man. And it's definitely been one of the better YouTube friendships and collaborations that I've done so far. I really love talking to you. Unfortunately, our schedules don't let us match as much, but certainly it's always a pleasure to share airtime with you, buddy.
Yeah, and for those of the people on your channel, I think most of them are familiar with me, but I'm V Radio. I got my start many years ago. I had a very successful podcast, but that was like back in the early days. I took a long break because I wanted to help concentrate on my kids for a while, and now they're kind of to a teenage age where they're a bit more independent in the things they want to do. But my big claim to fame was that was that I made a documentary that helped identify the first shooter in the Kyle Rittenhouse incident. My history as far as political activism, I was part of Occupy. I was actually, ironically, I'm a left-leaning guy, and I voted for Bernie Sanders in like 16 and 20. Occupy was a left-leaning thing, but I have more or less kind of fallen into this weird situation of being the anti-woke leftist. Because I don't really, basically, I mean, you guys can check out my channel for my opinions about that stuff, but it puts me in an interesting scenario where my viewership is kind of mixed between right and left. That's kind of the way I want it. I don't really focus a lot on right versus left politics right now, because I think we have more important problems. Like, can we have open dialogues? Can we have honest dialogues? Because it was one of the things that got me back into it was I watched the coverage of the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff, and it was just so false. Like, it was just so wrong, and it was
Bullshit.
easy to verify how screwed up it was.
Right.
And so that's what led to me doing that. And it was a lot of work, but it was worth it. So like, oh, I got a super chat here too. 1 second. I'm over here like trying to spread the link to a lot of people, but it's super chat from Lucifer the Doberman. You two are my favorite YouTubers. Aw, see?
Nice.
See, Lucifer the
Appreciate you.
Doberman has impeccable taste. So you guys should listen to him, about what channels that he checks out. So so today, you guys might remember I did a Dr. Phil episode review once with a trans activist friend of mine, and she and I discussed that one. And then now there's another one that came out about abolish the police, and we're going to be going over that today. But first of all, obviously, let's first of all just kind of frame the point itself. Like, you're a police officer. What are your positions on the abolish or defund the police narrative?
I think it's bullshit. To be honest,
Well, that was predictable.
I mean,
but yeah, go ahead.
it's got to be the dumbest idea on the planet that perverts a very good point. Like every profession, you're going to need change. Every profession is going to need growth. Every profession is going to need evolution. So, does policing need advancement, change, evolution, progression? Absolutely. Do police officers need new training? Do they need new tools? Do they need some of their duties taken away from them? As a police officer, I do so much. I respond to everything. Maybe I shouldn't respond to some of the things that come over that radio. But to say that we should underfund our police, remove funding from them, to say that we should abolish police altogether, and somehow, some way, the community will, like an amoeba, surround the bad guy with love and you know pray away. We're not praying away the gays. That's terrible. I don't believe in that crap. But we're praying away the evil now. You know what I mean? Like, what the
Right.
hell? This is crazy. That makes no goddamn sense to me, and it will never work. And all it is a talking point to play on people's fears. That's all it is. To, I believe, enrich people who are in that movement, because you can't possibly be genuine and say that slogan to me.
Right. It's something that you and I talked about the first time I had you on my show, is that I had a African American friend who goes to these protests, and he usually kind of quietly listens, and he said that because he's black, people will maybe say things in front of him that they may not, say in front of someone else.
Right.
And I asked him, like, what do you run into, when it comes to who does this abolish the police stuff, who feels that way? And he's like, they come in like two categories. I was like, well, what are they? He's like, kids who are totally naive about crime. He's
Mm,
like, and his wording was, maybe they think they know the hood because they drove through my neighborhood once on their way to a club or a rock concert. He's like, but they don't
mm,
know anything about our day-to-day life. They don't know what a drive-by shooting looks like. They don't, he's like, they don't have any concept of what's really going on here. And I
mm.
said, well, what's the other group? And he says, criminals. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, as in lifelong criminals, people that I grew up with who have been criminals their whole lives. Of course, they want to abolish the police.
Right.
And when you think about it, it's a sad state of affairs, but that is definitely it's definitely the thing that I get into when I talk to some of these people, is that so many
Mhm.
of them don't really understand what they're talking about. For one
Right.
thing, where I grew up, there were already, like, in a lot of these bad cities, there already is underfunded police. So like,
Right.
so the police are not even really all that relevant to your
No.
life if you live in that neighborhood, because you're going to call them, you
And they're not
know,
gonna come.
right. And it
They're gonna
might
come two
take two
hours later.
hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like they're in your day-to-day life getting up in your business. They're
Right.
not, it's like, can they be there at all? And they all wanted to be. Like, I remember once calling them once for a burglary
Yeah.
because our door was open and we are not the ones who left it open, right?
Yeah.
And then it come to find out, it took them 2 hours to get there. I'm like, Jesus, by the time it took them to get here, they could have murdered us, buried our bodies, rented a U-Haul, and took everything we owned.
That's a
But
fact.
they were doing
Yeah.
their best with what they had, right?
Yep. Yep.
So I've been around a lot of different angles on this, and obviously I'm against police brutality. Who isn't, right?
Right.
Obviously I'm against unjustified police shootings, but there's a lot of understandings about what crime is like, and also
Hmm.
just that they don't understand that criminal organizations would be more than happy to show up and fill in the void. And that is a point actually that somebody finally makes during this Dr. Phil episode we're going to be reviewing.
Mm.
Was that it's not like the power vacuum just vanishes because you got rid of the police. Like,
That's
if
a fact.
anything, it changes in a very negative way. And they had their opportunity. The Chaz Chop, the Chaz Chop police, ironically, were walking around with AR-15s, right?
Yep.
And accosting people and bullying people. Like, that was like Donut Operator did a video about that. It's like, I think it's called.
People died. People died in Chaz Chop, and
Yep.
somebody got raped.
Yep, I had Villain Report on before he passed away. He was
Mm.
present when that happened. They
Right.
shot up a car and killed the adult and then wounded the 14-year-old, and then we never heard about what happened to them after that.
That's
You
right.
know, and so it just, and then, like, there was that hilarious moment at the George Floyd memorial where, like, there's a bunch of journalists there talking about, and they're passing extensive police reform, blah 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 blah, and then a gunfight opens up behind them in broad daylight.
Right. Right.
you know like, and I did a whole video specifically exposing just how the George Floyd Memorial Zone had become a complete and total, just, it was a haven for crime.
Right.
And they interviewed several black police, I mean, sorry, not black policemen, black business owners who were like, this has not been good for us. Like,
Right.
like, pregnant woman got shot right out in front of my store, and then, like, we can't get the cops out here, like, so it's not working. And the funny thing is like, I do believe in a world that can eventually happen where we theoretically evolve to a point where there's a lot less need for police, but I
Right.
don't see it ever happening in our lifetimes. And a large part of the part that they don't want to acknowledge is that it would require
Hmm.
a massive change in the value system that people
Hmm.
operate on. And
Right.
I think you and I both being left leaning, yeah, there is a component to that is, of course, exasperated by poverty.
Yeah.
But, just getting rid of poverty alone would not solve this problem,
No. So
and
here's a good example, right? You get rappers. And I'm not going to pick on rappers. I pick on them all the time, but maybe I'm going to pick on them. You get
right,
rappers. You get athletes, and you give them a boatload of money, and yet we still see them engaging in some of the same crimes that people engage in poverty.
right,
We see what's this guy, Juice World. I'm not a big rap fan, but his name stands out. Juice World, who was dropping #1 albums. He's flying on a private plane, and what is he doing? Smuggling drugs.
right,
The police get tipped off to it, so they want to search the plane. He gets scared. He ingests an enormous amount of drugs to try and conceal it, and he dies from a drug overdose. You
right,
got, NBA Young Boy. These are names that a lot of our viewers may not know, but just listen to the examples. You don't have to know the people. This is a young rapper, And what is he doing? He's constantly in trouble for having guns and all that stuff. These folks have the resources and the money to remove themselves from these situations that people in poverty may not have the ability to do, but yet they still find themselves committing the same crimes that people commit inside of those communities, because it's not about the money and the resources, it's about the mindset, it's about the culture. That's what it's about. So
Right.
yeah, I agree with you 1000%.
And it's the culture part is the part they never want to address,
Right.
and it's something that real activists like Pastor Corey Brooks was on my show. That was a fantastic show, but he is doing activism trying to save poor youths in Chicago, in the worst part, like the worst city in the United States. And one of the things that got my attention was he pointed straight out. He's like, riots aren't helping us.
Nope.
Like this stuff isn't helping us. He's like, I'm trying to get kids jobs. I'm trying to, like, keep them out of jail. None of that helps, right?
Right.
And we had a great conversation. And the funny thing is, a lot of it was just me saying, "Are the following things true?" And he was like, "Yep, yep, yep, yep." But
Yeah.
there were a lot of things that me as a white poor person apparently cannot ever possibly understand, even though I grew up in a predominantly, people of color neighborhood that was in high poverty with high crime and high gang activity. And, like, how could I possibly know what I'm talking about? But he was a fantastic guy, and he's in his organization. He's struggling to get funding, and Black Lives Matter is sitting on millions that they paid themselves ridiculous salaries out of, like, that frustrates me, because this man is actually really helping, young
Right.
people to the best of his ability. And I joked with him. I was like, so looks like Patrice Cullors' net worth is like $5 million. What could you do with $5 million? And he's like,
Right.
wow, well, I'd build a community center with educational programs. And, like, he just started going down the list of all these things that would make a huge difference, right?
Right.
And then what did Black Lives Matter do? I think they made some kind of weird planter dome thing in one of the cities where you can plant your own plants. I was just like, what the hell is this about? I'm like, and then so many of the victims' families are now sick of it, because
Right.
like, they're not getting money even to help with, like, their with the funeral costs for their kids. They'll show
Right.
up, and, like, one of these people is like, they're like ambulance chasers. They showed up here to fundraise in the name of my son, and then I never saw them again.
Right.
But anyway, so
Mhm.
is there any point you want to make before I get us to this Dr. Phil episode?
So is this the Dr. Phil episode you originally wanted to collaborate on, but we didn't have time? Was this something
Yes,
different?
it's the same one. Abolish the
Okay.
police
Okay.
is the
Cool.
topic.
All right.
Okay.
Let's do it.
All right, I'm gonna do it. So at one point, I'm gonna have to pause this, because I'm gonna show one of my videos that debunks one of the crazy points made by one of these people. But all right, without further ado, I'll probably fast forward it a little bit here, because we don't need to watch the intro.
On and on.
Go over
Some
here.
from the streets.
All right, we'll go here.
Some, but not all police. And the disproportionate targeting of Black Americans in arrests, shootings, and killings that dredged up feelings of distrust and criticism of law enforcement in general. Now, some major cities heeded passionate demands and declared they were cutting and redirecting money away from police budgets and removing officers from the streets. 2 years later, some are saying it's been a dangerous debacle, a flawed experiment that led to unprecedented levels of crime and violence in cities that cut and/or diverted law enforcement budgets. Others are calling bullcrap on that, saying it's all part of a national misinformation campaign to divert attention away from the real issues and the communities who not only need police protection, but also need protecting from those charged with guarding their safety and security.
When I say defund, you say police, defund! Police! Defund! Police!
The movement to defund the police is about a radical reimagining of the way that we address social problems in this country. Police budgets have grown, so what we see is over-policing that does not actually affect the ways in which crime play out.
Seattle, we were dealing with the struggles and the challenges of dealing with the defund the police movement, and then had to work very hard to address this area of, for lack of a better word, lawlessness that came as a result.
There's been a lot of misinformation about what defund is. And maybe that's because we picked a bad thing to name it. It is not about taking all of the money from the police right now. This is not true. Defund is about interrupting so-called crime.
We need to refund the police. Police are demoralized and criminals are in. The lack of training is devastating for police officers. Police officers who are not properly trained end up hurting people on the streets. They can learn how to de-escalate situations. The defund the police movement is wrong.
I have for several years studied this societal situation, a fair amount, actually. And in fact, have even hired a team of research analysts who have really been digging into the complex issues involved. Now, before we're done today, I'm going to tell you what the facts are and what scientific research tells us about this whole issue. You may like what I have to say, and you may not. But it's time somebody stopped the spinning and told you the facts and what it all means to you and your family, whether you're white, black, or brown. Now, joining me today are Kat Brooks, Executive Director of the Justice Teams Network and co-founder of the Anti-Police Terror Project, the longest-running defunding police project in the country, along with Michael Denzel Smith, award-winning author, writer-in-residence at Hunter College, and podcast host. I'm also pleased to welcome Carmen Best, former Seattle police chief and now author of Black in Blue, Lessons on Leadership, Breaking Barriers, and Racial Reconciliation. Also joining me is Mark Powell, a former Reserve San Diego police officer and former vice president of the San Diego County Office of Education. So thank all of you for being here. I appreciate it. I'm not sure that defund the police was the best terminology or that it got interpreted exactly the way it was originally intended. So I'm curious how you guys feel about it. I'll start with you as a former police chief. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, well, just as you said, Dr. Phil, one of the things that I thought was quite confusing.
Oh, and don't forget, Strategic, if you ever want to comment and you want me to pause it, just say so.
All right, before you jump back in, I just want to remind all of our viewers to please hit that like button. Please hit that like button, support the channel. And thank you for everybody who's dropped super chats on both of our shows so far. All right, let's go.
From the beginning was when you say defund the police, depending upon whom you're talking to, it means different things to different people. So some people would say it means divest and invest in other areas. Some people say it means abolish.
Let's pause it right here real quick.
So
Pause it.
we needed to at least have a clear definition.
Go ahead.
All right, so I want to comment about this lady right here. I think she was like a Portland police chief, Portland.
Yeah, it was Seattle, I think. But
Seattle,
she was in an area where CHOP happened.
Where CHOP. Now, the funny thing about this, right, is that the reason why she left, right, is she didn't like some of the changes that they were making in the CHOP location in Seattle. They also wanted to cut these progressive folks who are supposedly making changes to benefit African Americans. They also wanted to cut her salary lower to give her a pay cut lower than what the previous police chief, who was a Caucasian male, was making. And she brought that up to them. She said, "Yo, why do you want to pay me less than the last guy who was a white guy? How's that fair?" You know what I mean? So like, these folks aren't even consistent when they're trying to pretend like they're woke, you know. But keep going.
Right. Well, you know, and it was really ironic to me that we got to watch this because she was literally presiding there at the time that they just decided to let, you know, some criminals take over a few city blocks. They don't go into that in this conversation, but I found it ironic. But anyway, we'll continue.
To actually figure out what are we talking about when we say that. I do think that, as I've heard many times before, people want, when police respond, they want officers to be fair and just and have equity. The melanin in your skin should not determine the service of police service that you get. However, the facts bear out that there is disparity. So we need to find a path forward to reduce that disparity, to eliminate it, but also recognize that we've made a lot of movement and advancement, and we need to continue to work on that in a practical manner that makes all of us here safer.
When we're talking about a society where 1 in every 1,000 Black men can expect to be killed by law enforcement, we have not made progress. When we talk about a society
1 in 1,000.
1 in 1,000? Are you guys serious about this?
That's what they said.
That
I
is-
looked at that and it was like, what?
Is that a real statistic?
No, it
It's
can't be.
bollocks.
I've
But
been over the statistics. Like, what is it? There's like, I think there's like 37 million black people
There'd be
total.
like hundreds of thousands of dead black people by the
Right.
hands of police.
Hundreds
know?
of thousands when we don't even, like, in 2019, 259 black people were killed.
Right.
Total, not adjusted for whether or not it was police shooting, like, was legit or not. Only 13 of which were unarmed. And my source for that number, ironically, is Black Lives Matter. Right.
I'm gonna
Go ahead.
show you. Make my screen big.
Let me see if I can do that. This one? Oh, that worked.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it worked. Yeah.
Okay,
This is a real statistic. This is from CBS News. See, in St. Louis, which is 44% black people, 64.54 murders per 100,000 people. That's St. Louis. That's a real number.
Everything you need.
Of course, you got commercials that destroys
Right.
everything. I'm sorry. Oh, scroll
We'll
up.
forgive you this time.
Got to scroll up. Let me scroll up too far. Let's go back down. Number 2 is Baltimore. We all know that that's a majority black city. 58.27 per 100,000 murdered. Not by cops, by other people. Most often black people killing black people. Birmingham, Alabama, majority black town. Same thing. Detroit, Michigan, 41.45. These are real numbers. Dayton, Ohio. These are real numbers. These are places where your chance of dying is tenfold more than it would be by a police officer of any color. But we can't tackle these issues because we're constantly burdened with the misinformation that police are the most dangerous individuals you could possibly meet as a black man, even though black and Latinos who are poor call the police more than anybody else. Poor people in general, wherever you are, whether it's a poor white community or a poor black community or poor Latino community, those, by virtue of being poor, statistically, you're going to use police services more than people in the middle class or rich.
Yep.
And so you're going to have more contact with the cops. And so therefore, every year, police officers have millions of contacts with poor black and brown people, and only 200 and change have been shot by police. And the vast majority of that 200 and change, they had a knife, they had a gun. We only could get between 15 and 25 people who are unarmed killed by police every year. 15 to 25 out of millions of contacts. Make that make sense, V?
Well, yeah, and that's one of the things that's screwed up that I know that statistic's made up. That's like if it was 1 in 4 black men can basically will get killed by police, it just doesn't add up to the statistics. And I went over all that in my Truth About Police Shootings. You're looking at like 7,800 blacks murdered in a year, 259 blacks killed by cops in 1 year. So it's not even possible, and like as you pointed out, like what people's, let me go ahead and pull up something here. Like I have the Gallup poll that shows that black people, by and large, want to retain police presence, that they understand, that this is critical, that you can't go without this, and that's, black Americans want to, police to retain local presence. They know that it's important, right? And the ones who don't are usually like, how often do you run into these like upper middle class, like kids who are talking about this, like they have some idea of what they're talking about, or the Joy Reid, who's a millionaire, I'm sure she knows everything about the struggle, right? I just, this is just nonsense. But yeah, that I had to posit at that number because I remember looking at that and going, nah.
I just want to add one thing. One thing. I speak to people in the hood. I have friends in the hood. I have some family members that still live in the hood. And when I say the hood, I say that with love, because the things that you learn there are things that prepare you for the rest of your life. If you live your life without struggle, you're not prepared for when you encounter adversity as an adult. Now, that's not true across the board, but that's my story, and I'm grateful for the experiences I've had. But I just want to end it with this before we continue with the video. The people who live in these low-income communities, that are at times over police simply because all the crime is there. All they want is respect. Like you said, like the article said, they don't want less police because they understand that they're in more danger from the drug dealer down the block and the gang banger next door. Those are the true threats to their lives. The people who lack empathy, the people who don't care about our rules and our regulations and our laws.
Right.
At least police are somewhat accountable for what they do. We see police go to jail all the time. You're fired. All they want is respect. And it's so sad that these activists have taken that very basic request that we could have gotten during police reform. This push for police reform, rather. We could have gotten that.
Right.
But they distorted it and they made it ugly, and now nothing changed. Really.
Right. And that's the messed up part about it, is that it really comes down to the fact that it always comes down to the fact that they have like this really unrealistic view of how things are going on. Like, you would literally just believe, if you were listening to them, that apparently only innocent people are ever harmed just by police in these neighborhoods. You know, and I think I mentioned this before we came on. Like, the police are such a small part of your life when you live in these places, because there's not enough of them, you know. And like, I remember I recommended that Netflix show to you. I don't know if you ever watched it, but it's about being a cop in Flint. And
I watched it.
They're defunded just by, there's just not enough money, you know.
Yeah, I was like, is this a police? When I was watching it, it's interesting. It was like a reality show kind of thing. And I'm like, is this a police force? Like, I felt so bad for them. Like, their buildings look like trash. Like, their police station looked like a repurposed school. You know?
Right,
Like,
exactly. And there'd be like 8 cops on a shift to patrol the entire city of Flint, which is already a high crime area. Yeah, it was definitely rough. And I recommended that show to anybody on, who could go to Netflix. I think it's called Flint Town. You know, but anyway, as you would say, let's keep going.
Where Black folks in particular make up the majority of people that are profiled, targeted, incarcerated by our criminal legal system, we are not talking about progress. Some things that I do want to address. Actually, there was not confusion about what defund means until law enforcement inserted that confusion. What I can say is that organizers, creators of this movement were always very clear that it was about redirecting resources to things that actually keep us safe.
Well, it might have been clear in the conference room. It might have been clear when y'all were meeting about it, but it wasn't clear on the streets, and it wasn't clear with all the people that took up the message and found a camera to stand in front of. Because I can show you 1,000 images that have the word abolish with defund. So the message got hijacked is my point.
So I have to stop it here because we're going to look at another video I did, because this is total fiction. Because later on, the founders of Black Lives Matter specifically openly admit to what was really going on. And I'm going to go ahead and pull it up here. But it's some of us always suspected that abolish was the real story there, and they're going to get into that a little bit. But first, I'm going to go with pulling this up. Here we go. This isn't very long.
The idea that... So do you remember when people were suggesting that the idea that Black Lives Matter wants to abolish the police was preposterous, that really they just want to defund the police, and that no real majority of activists actually wanted to abolish the police? The people who want to abolish the police, they're just fringe outliers and, not in any way like actually related to the core of the movement. Well, here's the 3 founders of Black Lives Matter sitting down in their $6 million mansion discussing the issue.
Remember, we used to pretend like we weren't had to pretend like we weren't defund the police. Because this is a budget issue, right? And now we are talking about abolition. Yeah, we kind of just mean abolition.
So to those among you, and you know who you are, who made fun of or insulted or laughed at people for suggesting that the Black Lives Matter movement was pushing for abolish the police and not really for defund the police, how stupid do you feel now? They literally laughed. Do you remember when we had to pretend that we were about defund the police when really we were about abolish the police? You know who they're laughing at? You. They're laughing at you while sitting in a $6 million mansion that they bought with your donations that were supposed to go to, supposedly, supporting Black lives and fighting to end police brutality. So there's a double joke going on here. The first one is they always meant abolish from the beginning, exactly as I told you, and exactly as many other people told you. You dismissed it as a right-wing talking point or conspiracy theory, but this is what they were always on about. This was always their intention, exactly as we told you. And the other intention was to get a whole lot of money together to fatten their pockets. Because now all three of those women are millionaires, as I covered in my stream about the Black Lives Matter cash enterprise. So there are a lot of things right now that people laughed about or called conspiracy theories or right-wing talking points before that are clearly proving to be true. So what other stupid beliefs do you have that have been given to you by MSNBC? And I say this as, again, a person who leans to the left. Don't believe for a moment that you're not being manipulated, because you are. When you combine the issue of the attitude about wanting to abolish the police with the same attitude that seems to require that people of color not be held accountable when they're obviously guilty, you kind of get a picture. The reality here is that they would like to set themselves up as a privileged race that is allowed to commit crime with no consequences. No matter what the situation is, they are automatically innocent because of 400 years of perceived oppression that went on before they were born and before anybody else was born, who's currently living. That's what this is really about. They're being conditioned to believe that their race should be above reproach on everything. This is a supremacist ideology that is being essentially gestated in the minds of these people. So aside from the absurdity of continuing to support Jussie Smollett, even though he was found obviously guilty of perpetuating a hate crime hoax, we could also talk about what headspace someone has to be in order to actually be seeking bail for the Waukesha Parade massacre killer Darrell Brooks, which BLM Milwaukee is doing right now. It's probably the same headspace that the 3 jurors who refused to convict a black man of murder despite overwhelming evidence and despite the nature of his crime, because he was black. He tied up a woman and stabbed her 22 times. This was obvious murder, but the most that they would give him was manslaughter because they couldn't bring themselves to send a black male to jail. Now, I've already done videos on this tangent topic, so I won't belabor that too much in this one. I'll just link them in the cards. But to sum this up, they were always lying. They always wanted to abolish the police. And they may have other ways of trying to justify this, but the reality is, at the end of the day, they live in a world where they believe that people of color, black people specifically, should not be held accountable for their actions in some kind of karmic sense of justice for 400 years of oppression that they were not alive for. That individuals who happen to be black should gain the privilege of being let off easy from crimes or just not prosecuted altogether because of things that happened to other black people before they were born. This is again a supremacist ideology that is simply trying to establish privilege for a different group. It's not trying to abolish privilege. It's not about equality. It's again about inverting what they believe the hierarchy to be. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in, folks. These are the cards.
All right. Did you have any comments on any of that before we go on?
The only thing I want to have clear, I want to be fully clear,
sure,
in the direction you're going in, is that this is not every black person. These are specifically,
no, definitely not.
Yeah, these activists, these folks that come from these super liberal schools that don't let you think outside of the box. That's their ideology, and I've heard them say it with my own ears. But the average black person does
Thinks this
not
is
believe these
ridiculous.
things. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Like, they're
Yeah.
not trying to, be supremacists over white people. They just want to live their life, man.
Right.
They just want a world where, like in New York, you don't have a ton of people coming into the city claiming asylum and getting better treated than Americans who are still there. These are the things, this type of mentality is the things we should be talking about in our society, instead of being hung up on all these these fallacies of what the institution and the police and all. Look at how our system reacts to people who snuck over a border. Many of them, if you ask them why they're there, they say, well, I'm here because I just want a job. And look how we treat those folks compared to how we treat women and children who are Americans and most often minorities.
Right.
This
Yeah,
is
and
ridiculous.
And if anybody did get that impression, I mean, specifically talking
Mm-hmm.
about like people who engage in this kind of activism, that it's like they have a weird worldview, and we're going to get into a little bit of that here. But it's like you remember you did it. I think you did a review on the Joy Reid, and then Robbie, and then that weirdo from Twitter who like just wants everybody released immediately,
Right.
like no matter what crime they committed. So some guy like beats up an Asian old man or old woman, and then gets released immediately to then go injure some other random person. And then it's like, no, we shouldn't incarcerate these people. Like, it's just, that's the part that I was talking about. And they
Right.
definitely, like, in the Jussie Smollett thing, like, did you watch the, what's it called? Oh, geez. It's not The View. It's like, it's a different show. I think it's called The Real. And like one of the ladies that was on The Real was the same lady behind the documentary, Everything's Gonna Be All White. And she was just lividly angry that Jussie Smollett may go to jail. And she said that it was low-key noble that he committed a race hoax, like to try to get himself more attention.
So to waste police resources, to endanger police officers' lives, to endanger the lives of the dopes who decided to collaborate with him in this hoax, that's courageous.
Right. Or like
It's
that he did it for
necessary.
some noble purpose, when the reality is
He's
it
a
was
freedom
pretty clear he was
fighter.
trying to get attention for himself and his career.
We should put him in the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. now. Come on, man.
Right. No, exactly.
We should make him his own embracing / penis statue.
Well, right, and that's why in this, when you play when you show the Gallup poll, like it totally goes along with what you said. The vast majority of African Americans are not on board with this stuff.
No,
and pretty much the entire woke movement, to be honest, really represents what I would call a loud minority that has just managed to position themselves in such a way to appear to be a much more relevant part of society than they actually are.
Right.
So
it really is.
All right,
they have all the money. Yeah, they're well funded. They're well funded. They have the money, and therefore they have platforms like MSNBC and CNN that will give them a platform to the world.
Right.
They have it.
Well, that was like one of the memes I made was like, there was a panel about Kyle Rittenhouse, and I was like, you know what? I wonder what the net worth of everybody here is. And the weird professor who's got like Einstein hair is like worth over $17 million. Wow. Joy Reid's worth like $5 million. Like everybody on the lowest net worth was Al Sharpton, is only worth about $500,000.
And the funny thing is, and I gotta be honest with you, you can't believe those net worth things. They're always higher because you think Al Sharpton is just worth $500,000. That's not true. Al Sharpton has had tax problems for 1,000 years. Guys like that don't get paid to themselves. They get paid to LLCs.
Right.
Joy Reid is getting paid to an LLC. So she probably has $5 million in her personal bank account, but she's pulling a salary and expenses from her company that she's the sole proprietor of, and that's where the wealth is at. Joy Reid LLC is worth $20 million probably, but Joy Reid, the person, is only worth $5 million. Al Sharpton, to shield himself from all the debts he has, is probably worth $500,000. But guess what? Anytime he needs something to eat, he needs to travel, he needs to buy something. Guess what? He can pull from that LLC. His cars are LLC. Because I'm a landlord, I could buy a car and put it under my LLC and drive that car around every day as my regular driving car, but it just belongs to my corporation, Or you could do that as a YouTuber. You could buy a car as a YouTuber. You could buy a house as a YouTuber.
Right.
And underneath your YouTube LLC. It's just a way of hiding money. These people are worth way more money than what you think they're worth. How long has Al Sharpton been on MSNBC in various capacities, and they pay like their lowest contributor $250,000 a year? He had his own primetime show at one point, and we think he's only worth $500,000. Negative.
Right. No, I agree completely. And in addition to that, it kind of comes back to, I would want to bring it back around to, like, the main reason I played that clip was just that the three founders of Black Lives Matter are laughing all the way to the bank.
Absolutely.
And you remember when we had to pretend that we just wanted to defund the police?
Yeah.
Like the budget issue.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I don't know how many times you argued with people about it, but how many times were you told nobody wants to abolish the police? Nobody's saying
Right.
abolish the police. You know, meanwhile, the three founders of Black Lives Matter are laughing somewhere, drinking, martinis with
Yep.
money they paid themselves. Like,
Yep.
what was it? You watched my stream about the Cash Enterprise. It was
Oh, yeah.
like Colors paid her baby daddy almost $1 million for quote unquote creative work. Like,
Yep.
what would you do, buddy? Did you draw some crayon pictures or something?
Mm-hmm.
What did you do to almost own $1 million worth of activist money that was donated because people actually care?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, people can watch that stream of you guys. I break down all the numbers, and I also play the videos of how she was squirming in her chair when somebody finally confronted her. She didn't. Oh, well, this isn't my money. It's my family's money, and I need to take care of my family. That's why I'm buying $5 million houses and all that, and that's why I can't contribute any money to anyone else. Whereas Candace Owens brightly pointed out, it's interesting that you want to abolish the police, but you have private security and you live in a gated community,
Right.
not anywhere close to the communities that you claim you're trying to help.
Mind you, he's a white guy. And listen, in my perfect world, who cares? He's probably a really good security guard, but you're supposed to be like pro-black and empowering black people. There's no qualified black guys you could hire with that
Right.
black donation money. Come on, man.
Right, exactly. All right, so let's keep going.
You're saying suddenly we see people talking about abolish. Well, defunding comes from an abolitionist perspective, right? It is a long-term project that says, how do we create the conditions under which policing would not be necessary? And defund is the policy that says, well, a city budget has this much money going to police and this smaller amount of money going toward roads, towards housing, towards schools, towards recreation. Why don't we take some of this money over here, move it over here? What we're trying to accomplish is, again, what does it mean for communities to actually be safe? And what we've shown time and time again is that more funding toward policing does not work. The question is, to me, it's not about whether or not you support defunding. It's like, what does the budget look like, and how many officers will there need to be in order for you to eliminate crime? Like, can that question be answered?
Yeah, well,
Okay, well, hang on. We've got to take a break, and I'll start with you when we come back. A Seattle resident who says their neighborhood has become hell on earth ever since the city council pledged to defund the police in 2020. We're going to meet her after the break. We'll start with you right after the break.
PD is struggling under the public backlash.
I'll pause it for a
20% of the force.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just disagree with that premise fundamentally. That we have to remove money from protecting people and property. This is important as well because we have to protect commerce. That's what drives our economy.
Right.
In order to fund other things, like, why aren't these folks interested in actually how government spends money? All the waste. Like, we just sent enough money to solve homelessness over to the Ukraine.
Right.
In a place
over.
Many times over. In a place like New York, I mean, I only speak about New York often because I live in the state of New York. The city of New York just had to come up with $2 billion to take care of the migrants who are coming into the city. What difference could that have made to inner city communities? So, I mean, like, the money is there, but they're acting like we have no money and we have to remove that money from policing, something that is already underfunded.
Right. Well, they don't understand it. And in addition to the fact that to do what they want to do, I don't think that moving the police budget immediately creates the societal changes that are necessary to just suddenly no longer need police.
Right. It doesn't
Like
solve
that,
anything.
right? And honestly, the money needs to come from somewhere else. Like, how about our inflated defense budget? That's outrageous, right?
Right.
I mean, stuff like that. I mean, there's plenty of other places to get the money. It doesn't need to come out of the policing. And it's just I've never seen it work anywhere. Like, the places that have poor police usually are ruled by criminal cartels. The Mexican police are an excellent example of that. Was that, at one point the cartel is so powerful there that they finally arrested the leader of the major Sinaloa cartel, and they launched a military style assault on the government of Mexico to force them to release the guy. And then what did the guy say? Well, the Mexican president's like, well, we had to release him. The cost is too high, so we're just going to invest on programs for the poor. I was like, oh, well, that sounds interesting. I mean, I'm poor, so obviously I'd like to see more programs, but that doesn't solve all the crime. I think one of the points that you made earlier about the rappers that's really important is that there's so much crime that goes on in the ghetto that has nothing to do with survival. And they're going to get into this point here in a moment. But like, you can get shot for dissing someone. Well, what's that?
Stepping on a guy's shoes.
Right. Yeah.
I forgot to actually say it. I wanted to give a shout out and a PSA before we started the show. But NYPD off-duty police officer was shot in the head and is fighting for his life right now. He went to a part of Brooklyn that was Crown Heights or something section of Brooklyn. Might be wrong on the section, but he went to a part of Brooklyn to purchase a car from a guy off of Facebook Marketplace. I purchased my truck from Facebook Marketplace, and the person obviously that he was dealing with, it was totally fraudulent. He gets there, and that guy, not knowing that he's a cop, pulls out a gun and tries to rob him. The officer pulls out his weapon. They engage in a gunfight. Unfortunately, the bad guy gets the best of him and shoots him in the head. What does that have to do with poverty and survival?
Right.
So if you're hungry, I guess we can all understand if you go into a grocery store and try to walk out with a loaf of bread. How do we equate poverty and survival with having the gumption and the lack of morality, the lack of care for your fellow human being to decide to pull a gun out on somebody and then shoot them to take what's worth for them? To me, there's something more broken there than just poverty.
So from your channel, A Lady says, why not spend your time on how the government is spending money? Why so obsessed with BLM? I can handle both. I do that on my channel all the time. I think the big problem is that BLM was given money specifically for the purpose of trying to make people of color's lives better. And it's only making a very, very small amount of people of color's lives better. And it's just sheer and obvious corruption. And in the meantime, they give out advice like burn down your city. That will improve the situation. Hate all police. Resist police at every count. Like, the attitudes that they've created have only led to inevitably more violence, more death. You were just talking about that case earlier. I think I remember from watching the video was just that he also, I mean, it's like, yes, what they did was excessive, but everybody's got this culture now of resisting arrest in a way that's going to make their lives so much more dangerous. Like, all their encounters with police so much more dangerous. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
How many of these videos do we watch where it feels like they're resisting arrest because they don't feel like being arrested that day? Like, they think they have a right to.
Right.
Now I have a right to resist arrest because I don't like cops and I don't want to be arrested. So I'm going to resist you. And then the equally complicated part of it is that in the meantime, the activists want the cops to do everything up to and including putting their lives in jeopardy to make it as easy as possible for this person to resist arrest. It's nonsense.
Right.
It's always a decision they're making while their lives are not on the line.
Right. And I got to say, I agree with you 1,000%, specifically with what you said. People gave BLM the money for a specific purpose. All right. When we give our money to the government, we're entrusting them to do what's best for America with that money. There's some initiatives that we'll fight for. I get it. It's a democracy. You're going to win. You're going to lose some things. But people specifically gave this money to BLM for a specific purpose, which is to fight against police brutality and to enrich the Black community with help that can make sure that we don't get the victims of tomorrow.
Right.
And they did nothing with it. the amount of money that they use to buy their mansion in the Hollywood Hills, where a great proportion of Black people cannot be found. The target audience that they're looking to help, which are inner city poor people, will have to take multiple trains and buses and taxis to get to the BLM mansion to get services, if that's where they're offering those services.
Which is
The
what they
amount of
claim
money,
it's for.
the amount of money they spent on those properties, they could have gone to places like Detroit and bought a skyscraper. They could have created a global headquarters in Memphis. They could have created a resort in parts of Florida.
Right.
They chose not to do that. They chose to enrich themselves, to overpay their relatives for mundane services, and to ignore what the people entrusted them to do. So I agree with you 1,000%.
Especially since they're in a position of power that they could do enormous things to help people in those communities. Like, they have the money. What's their excuse? The government's obviously corrupt. So what's the excuse of these activists? So to answer A-Lady's question, V-Radio, what are you doing to help the Black people you spend so much time making hateful videos about? Well, for one thing, I don't make hateful videos about Black people. But for another, I drive an hour out of my way to go back to the ghetto I grew up in, where I'm the director of a youth wrestling team that my son is literally the only white kid on. I hope that helps you understand. But I wager it's probably a lot more than you do. So in any case, she's always my biggest fan in your Discord.
She's my biggest fan too. She eviscerates me on a daily basis, but that's the beautiful thing about the Strategic Eyes show, man. All opinions are welcome.
For sure.
All opinions are welcome.
All right, so let's move on.
Have left in the past year and a half.
I chair the African American Community Advisory for the Seattle Police Department. It's a tough role to have. A lot of people have turned on me, call me a cop lover, traitor. Not a fan of defunding the Seattle Police Department. Yes, we need to hold them accountable, but we need our police department. We're in crisis right now in Seattle.
Whose streets are streets?
It's a free-for-all here. If you want to commit a crime, come to Seattle and you'll get away with it.
Joining us from Seattle, the city she calls home, is Victoria. So, Victoria, thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Why do you blame what's happening to Seattle on defunding the police?
I think people do misunderstand that word, and it's right there with abolishing the police. Once city council started talking about defunding the police, hell broke out. It's unsafe here. We've lost 300 to 400 officers. We're in crisis, and I think we're doomed. I don't even know if we can get back to where we were.
Well, Mark, you say San Diego is down 300 officers.
Yes, that's correct.
Has it had an effect?
It's been a horrible effect. The defunding plan has failed. It's a complete disaster. Our police are less safe, and the neighborhoods that need police the most are the ones that most affected, because it's the neighborhoods that are underserved, the underserved populations that need police. They can't afford to pay for pricey private securities or high-end surveillance cameras. Those are the people that are suffering, and make no mistake about it. Defund means take away money from police that were already running on tight budgets anyways. They didn't have enough money to do proper training. Officers have to have training. If you don't want the things to happen that you're claiming happens, then you have to train officers properly. And you have
$1 bazillion in training, $1 bazillion in cultural competency training, $1 bazillion in body cameras, $1 bazillion in all these things, and nothing has bared out.
We stopped there.
Your program made
We stopped there real quick.
American
Your
cities
program
have
made
not
crime
been
go up.
funded.
Yes.
It just has not happened.
A bazillion.
Yeah. I hate when people do that. Like, I don't want to go backwards, but I'm strategic, guys. I talk about whatever I want. I had this whole controversy about a YouTuber, a very successful YouTuber by the name of Rick from Good Luck America. And it just made me think about one of the things he said when he was talking about the Memphis Five, the 5 Black police officers that beat up an African-American male and beat him to death. He said, this group of guys were very successful. They took like 100,000 people off the streets. And like, people need to stop exaggerating. The actual number is in the 2 years that they were out there, they took 500 and change people off the streets. Me and my partner in 2022, me and my partner, we both arrested collectively 86 people because we go back and forth. So that's a team of 20 officers in an elite unit, and they took 500 and change off the streets. 2 people took 86. Not
Right.
100,000 like that guy said, but I'm not making this about him. I'm just giving an example. And here's this lady saying bajillion. That's not you're trying to make people think that it's way more. It's uncountable. It's a unfathomable number, and that's just not true. And I hate when people do it. It just made me think about that when she did that. You're trying to shut this guy down. You're trying to overtalk him by saying you're so far off base. I'm so right that it's an incalculable number that's in my favor. And that pisses me off.
Right. No, and I agree. In addition to this idea that supposedly bazillion, like where are they getting these numbers? I mean, she already like proves she has like no sense of what she's talking about, suggesting that 1 in 4 black men can be expected to be killed by the police.
Yeah.
Like it's ridiculous. Like, but this is one of the reasons why I did the Truth About the Police Shootings video. It doesn't mean I'm not for reform police. I obviously am for reform the police. I'd like to see those numbers of innocent anybody shot as low as possible. But at the same time, they're just lying. Like, that's why it starts to feel like, the terrorists, like we have to go to war in Iraq because of the terrorists, even though more people die by peanut allergy deaths than die by terrorist acts. But that's when there's some kind of agenda at play. Right. And to be honest with you, that's why I've said for the longest time, I think that whoever's behind all this nonsense, is diabolically racist. Right. There's no way that anybody suggesting to people to burn down their own communities, which leads to more poverty, more crime, and therefore, in turn, more police shootings, actually cares about people of color. There's no way that anybody who actually cares about them believes that that's the right idea. There's no way that anybody who's pushing for resegregation or any of these other things that keep finding their ways into all of this, like they're trying to shame people of color for marrying white people now. Like, it's like the civil rights movement is just slowly being unraveled. By whom? Well, it's not by Republicans, not that I'm a Republican, and it's not by the supposed allegedly enormous army of white supremacists. It's by people of color in activism who are now pushing for all of these things that step by step just seem to undo all of the great work by actual competent and genuine civil rights activists before them. And I realized, especially when you look at guys like Ibram X. Kendi, who makes like $45K or something for, it was $25K for a 45-minute Zoom call, that they don't really, it's not really in their best interest that this problem is ever solved, right? It's not in their best interest if we ever defeated racism, because how would these people might have to actually go get a real job, like have to actually go do something of real substance, instead of just, getting paid by schools to come and tell all the white kids how guilty they should feel for stuff that happened before they were born, but anyway, so, let's keep going.
Crime has gone up.
That's just a mistruth. Defunding has just not answered. I'm sorry.
We're not trying to win an argument. We're trying to solve a problem here. Let me ask the question here. Isn't it true that defunding pretty much across the board didn't really happen?
Yes, that's what's true.
Well,
budgets were reduced.
New York lost $1 billion.
But at least in LA, budgets were temporarily reduced. Most of the reduction was replaced with overtime with the officers they had, or the reduction was part of a citywide reduction. And most of the defunding diversion or reduction was regained the next year. So there hasn't really been a defunding of the
In some cases, I think, Dr. Phil, respectfully, I think in some cases budgets were reduced. I think part of the reason that some of the budgets were replaced and more money was given in because they saw the rise in crime and the rise in issues and wanted to mitigate some of those problems.
The money came back.
And also,
some of it.
Dr. Phil, when you have 9% inflation and gas prices that were pushing $10 a gallon in Los Angeles, and you leave the police budget the same, when healthcare goes up, when food prices go up, and you have these, everything went up. And my point is, by not adding money, You're just defunding them just by
Why is
regular
the answer
economics.
to those problems police?
And adding money from where? Law enforcement in every major municipality across this country has the majority of the general funds. And I'll tell you all this. Anything you want, from fixing potholes to cleaning up your parks, when your electeds tell you they don't have the money, it's because badges and guns have that money.
That's such
and
a lie.
I want to talk about this. I think
I was just gonna say that doesn't hold up.
No.
I haven't seen her say a single accurate thing through this entire show.
Yeah, man, it's just bullshit, bro. Really is. Social services take up and education takes up the majority of the budget of every single municipality. Social services, which includes welfare, homeless initiative, mental health, and your board of education. If you live in the suburbs, you literally have its own section on your property tax for your schools. If you're in a community that your property taxes fund your schools. I think like in New York, they said like almost, I'm gonna have to look up the statistic, but I heard half of the budget goes to board education. That might be too much and I don't want to speculate. But the NYPD, I think their budget is like $4 billion. Mind you, New York City has a budget of over $100 billion. And that agency has to protect almost 10 million people.
Right.
When you include undocumented people and visitors, etc., that are there every single year, every single moment. New York City is one of those unique places where there's a tourist attraction for every single season. So there's a whole different tourist attraction for the wintertime. There's a different tourist attraction for the summertime, for the spring, for the fall. There's something for everybody to want to come to New York City at any time of the year. Any time of the year, there's millions of people who are in there just from planes and trains visiting as tourists. And when you factor those people, those 2 million people a year to 3 million people with the population that exists there, which is 8.5 million, you have a police force of 25 to 30,000 officers securing and protecting 10 million people.
Right. Yep. And they're going to talk a little bit also about like actually, I don't know if that goes over in this episode, but the whole thing about like people say you're fetishizing property or whatever if we don't allow them to destroy the property. It all comes back to what I said earlier about how if you care about your local economy and you want it to improve, and if you want anybody to invest in your community, then the crime rates have to go down. It's just that simple.
Bananas.
Nobody wants to spend money in your community if that's the case. And then like every now and then you can get one of them to say, I guess what's the quiet part is just to say that that they believe that they want to burn all of the white businesses down so that black people will open businesses. And I said,
happening though.
How it's not. That's the thing. They just, those cities burn down and then they just stay that way. Like LA is just getting worse.
Yeah, you just see boarded up buildings if they're still standing. That's it. Now the people of those communities have to drive 5, 10, 15 miles to get to the nearest superstore, grocery store, shopping center. It destroys communities, man. It's horrible.
Right. And that's, I mean, do you remember that video of that woman in tears because they burned down the one store that she could get to?
Yeah.
An elderly black woman, actually. Like,
wasn't it a pharmacy?
Yeah, I think it might have been. Yeah, it was like where she could get her medication. It was the only place she could get to. Yeah.
They burned down Grandma's pharmacy. It's crazy.
Right.
And then, you know what? During those riots and just destruction of these communities, some store owners were saying, hey, you know, it's a little known secret that some of us don't even have insurance. They don't have, like, the building might have insurance for the person that they're paying rent to, so he or she or the corporation is going to get their money back. But the stores oftentimes don't have insurance on their inventory because they can't afford it. They're not Walmart and Target. They can't afford it. So when you steal from them, that's a loss that they can't write off, that they have to either write off on their taxes or it's just gone. They don't have an insurance company to call up and say, hey, you know, my shrink is $50,000 for this month. Can you please send me a check and reimburse me? And furthermore, even for the big box stores, people think that insurance is like free money. One,
Right.
your insurance premiums go up the more shrink you have. Two,
Yeah.
when the stores burn down, the big box stores, the insurance companies do repay the corporations, the Walmarts and the Targets and the CVSs. But they tell them you can't rebuild back in that community because it becomes like a floodplain. It's like, well, if they burned it down once, they could burn it down again. This is an unsafe community to build a $50 million store. So even if the corporation wanted to stay in the community, they won't be able to get insured if they stay.
Right.
And can't do that. That's just not how it works for a big corporation. So you've lost your Walmart, you lost your Target, you lost your CVS, your Walbombs, or wherever you shop at, because by virtue of burning down your community, you literally redline your community to these corporations.
Right. Well, and the insurance thing, it was always like, okay, well, it's okay if we burn these places down, they have insurance. Or that we loot from them because they have insurance. Like as if that's an acceptable I don't know. I get inhibitions, like, it's like I would never, I don't know. There's no morality to that.
Right.
Like, so it's okay to do this because they have insurance, so you're going to raise their premiums, like, and then it's always, well, you're prioritizing property over people. I'm like, actually, like, this property belongs to people.
Right.
People's lives who you're gonna kill. Like, it's like, I remember
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, the Hispanic immigrant family that owned the ice cream parlor in Kenosha that got burned down. I'm sure that destroying that will definitely help to fight police brutality, right?
Yeah. Come on. And these
Go ahead
places
and say what you were gonna say. Go
they're
ahead.
employing minorities.
Right.
So many priceless statements were made during that time that got overshadowed by the moment. If you really just take the time to listen to the interviews, you will hear the real heartbeat of America. You had Black people saying, yo, they burned down, especially the Wendy's, they burned down my store, I don't have no job anymore.
Right. Yeah.
The Walmart, look at all the food that they have to throw away just by virtue. The people broke into the Walmart in Kenosha and they stole all the TVs, all the electronics. They did not touch the food. But because of federal law and local health laws, the fact that they broke into that store, all of the food had to get thrown away, even the canned goods. The next day they had massive garbage bins, the construction ones, dumping canned goods in the garbage because legally they could not sell it.
That's so messed up.
It's messed up.
It's so bonkers.
You know how many people that could have feed, man?
Oh, yeah. And I used to work at all these restaurants, and at the end of the day, you have so much food, you're not allowed to give it away.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a larger issue we got to discuss, is with
Sure.
the government, like, hey, let's use this food. Let's allow these restaurants to feed people.
Sure.
Give them the pantries. But these are the laws we have now. These are the laws that are in place. And, you broke into this place to get a $300. I went to Walmart the other day, and I don't want to be here for 4 hours. You know how I am. I start crashing. So I'm going to be quick because I'm a long-winded so we could get through this. But I went to Walmart, and I'm like, for my studio, I have a little space behind these cameras that I'm going to make it into like a little man cave, but it's not big enough to have a big screen TV.
Right.
The wall that I'm looking at is probably going to be like a 40-inch, maybe even a 32-inch, And I go there, and I'm like, all right, let me see what kind of TVs they have. Their most expensive TV was like $600. Massive, like the TVs that I wanted was like $180, $220.
Right.
Like it's not even like like you went to Best Buy and you stole a $4,000 TV. Like everybody.
Well, yeah, the technology's gotten a lot cheaper. That's for sure.
Yeah, like you're robbing TVs that even if you're poor, you could manage to buy either through layaway or during tax time. Because American poor is different than any other poor in the world.
Right.
American poor, you can still engage in commerce. You're not eating grass and getting your water from the river like in most of the world. American poor, you have $300 sneakers on. You have Fendi belts on,
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be times where, and I'm talking about the average poor, especially in the East, not other parts of the country, but like you can get that TV. You didn't need to steal that. But whatever, that's a different conversation. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds and be taken out of context.
No, I understand completely. So let's continue.
This is critical to establish on this show. People want to blame defund, which just did not happen in any significant degree across the country. That's just not true. On the rise in crime. The spike in crime happened because the economic pandemic came hot on the heels of the coronavirus pandemic, which means that people that were housing secure became more housing insecure or homeless. People that were food insecure became more food insecure or starving. When we do not address people's basic needs.
I seem to recall there being an awful lot of money being thrown at everyone during the pandemic. I mean, there were people who were small business owners that had a rough time, but I don't remember. I don't know. It's the same thing like when they bring up this idea of starving.
Right.
No matter how poor I was, the food stamp program does a pretty damn good job.
Yeah.
Like I've never been starving, and I've been dirt poor my whole life. I'm not saying that it can't happen, but I mean, if it does, it's going to be due to the neglect of somebody in the situation. It's really not hard to get on those programs. Maybe it is in some other place in the country, and I just don't know about it. I
There
don't
are
know.
places like Mississippi where they take very little subsidy from the feds because of the political ideology of those states, and therefore they give smaller supplements. But other than that, like even aside from the assistance you can get from the government, there are so many. Like I remember there were times that we were really hungry until my mother wised up and heard about soup kitchens. That was her fault. No disrespect, Mom, but that was her fault. Like once she found out about the soup kitchens, we never had an issue again. Like we go there, and when I say soup kitchens, I mean like pantries, not soup kitchens. Soup kitchens, you go and you actually eat there. But like pantries, like so much food is available via pantries. You know that when you add that with assistance, and then also a desire to better yourself. It's very hard to starve in America.
Right.
Very, very hard to starve in America.
Yeah, and the pantries, man, I remember that now because every now and then, if like something happened, like maybe with paperwork or whatever, like you can go to a food pantry, man, and they will hook you up like crazy. Like you'll be like, "Holy crap, this is like $300 worth of food! Like you come back anytime." And I was just like, "Well, we're only going to do this if we absolutely need it, because there's going to be people that for some reason are not on stamps at the time that really, really, really need this." But I agree with you about the improvement stuff. That's the thing that has to change that you do through mentoring, and getting these kids a different influence. So, but let's keep going.
And we force people to make a living underground. You're going to see a spike in crime. So defund hit the streets the same time as the economic pandemic did, but defund did not cause the spike in crime.
Well, can I say something?
Yes, go ahead.
It absolutely did do something. I can't even tell you how many times I've been in stores where people walk in and it's not food, it's alcohol, clothes. And there was one woman and I confronted her and I said, "Put it back." And she said, "No." I said, "Well, I'm calling the police." And she laughed. She goes, "They won't show up. You don't have enough of them."
I'm so glad somebody pointed this out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that statement is perfect for this conversation, but in a larger conversation, when we add in stuff like bail reform, a team of guys were recently arrested in New York who are running around in a stolen minivan robbing multiple people. I think by the time they were caught, they had robbed between 6 and 8 people. And as they're being placed in a police car, and the media is asking, "Why did you do it? Can you tell us what your name is?" All this bull stuff. The guy goes, "It ain't nothing. Don't worry about it. I'll be out by tomorrow."
Right. Yep. Actual Justice Warrior did a video about that.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
The system is broken and it's now in favor of the perps. And
We're
and
supposed
but that lady
Go
was
ahead.
100% right. There's not enough of them. They're not going to drop what they're doing to come here to me and arrest me for petty larceny. And I'll give you an example. When I was a civilian, I got into a car accident and I'm like, okay, why is it taking so long for the cops to come? It literally took them 2.5 hours to get there. And I was really pissed. It's like, why it took you guys so long? We're just sitting here or whatever. And then I become a police officer and I realize that is on the bottom of my list.
Right.
I'm dealing with assaults. I'm dealing with robberies. I'm dealing with shootouts, all that stuff. It would be immoral for me to put those on hold and go deal with a car accident that technically, by law, in New York at least, you two people can just exchange information, fill out the form on your own, and call it a day. Because at the end of the day, at least in New York, police officer doesn't determine who's at fault. He just says, party A says this was happened, party B says that would happen, unless you witnessed it. So really, there's no reason for me to be there anyway. And in most police agencies in New York are making policies where police officers no longer respond to car accidents.
Right.
When you call 911, they'll tell you on 911, you guys need to handle that yourself. We don't respond unless somebody's injured or somebody's fighting or something to that effect. But that is on the bottom of the totem pole. So when you start looking at these impoverished communities like Detroit, you start looking at high crime areas like Seattle and Portland because of all of those crazy reforms, those officers are short-staffed, underfunded. The last thing that they're going to respond to is a petty theft in a store when they're dealing with stabbings and rapes and murders.
So I want to answer this comment from your chat. Riots were horrible, but the cause of the riots definitely need to be discussed instead of driving around the rock in the road and being praised. We should be removing the rock in the road. So let's talk about what caused the riots. I mean, the one I know the most about is Kenosha. And I bring this up all the time because we're rioting on behalf of a man who raped a woman, then returned to her house and violated the restraining order that woman had against him.
Right.
And then tried to leave with her car with her kids in it.
Right.
We're rioting because that guy got shot.
Right.
And people talk about
wait. And while because this is like my story here.
Sure.
While he's taking the kids and putting them in her car that he's going to steal, he's in the process of stealing. The mother is screaming at the officer, he's kidnapping my babies. Don't let him take my babies.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to me, I'm like, shoot him again.
But that's not why the officer shot him. The officer said, I didn't shoot him because of that. And he has a knife in his hand.
Right.
And he turns around as though he's going to stab the officer. But guess what? None of us were able to see that from our angle of the video. Do you know who corroborated the fact that it looked like Jacob Blake was going to stab the police officer, Officer Shesky? You know who corroborated that? The black people who live in that community.
Right.
They went on the record. They were interviewed. One of them said, I'm friendly with Jacob Blake. I'm cool with him. He looked like he was turning around about to stab that officer, and that's when I saw the officer shoot him. Multiple people gave that testimony who are out there and witnessed it, but they buried that. We didn't hear that until a year later when they finally make their district attorney announcement saying that they're not going to press any charges and that the officer didn't do anything wrong. That's when we finally hear it. But when it happened, all we heard was an innocent black guy who was just driving by minding his own business, happened with his children in the car, happened to see two stranger women fighting, and then he decides to come out his car to break up the fight. Mind you, leaving his own kids inside of the car by themselves, right? That'd be a great move to do as a dad.
Right.
And then while he's in the process of breaking up this fight between these two stranger women, the police showed up out of nowhere and then shot him in his back 7 times for no reason.
Right.
That's what Benjamin Crump said.
Right. I remember that. Yep. I did a whole video about that because I literally even like do a bait and switch in the video where I don't tell them what it's about. And the name of the video is Man Rapes Woman and then Returns to Steal Her Car and Abduct Her Children, because most people didn't even consider that's what Jacob Blake did.
Right.
That this is the guy that we're burning a city down for.
In all clarity, so that we're not, exposed to any liability from Jacob Blake. He is alive. What Jacob Blake did very briefly is this was his baby's mother, and he had a history of abusing her. He broke into her house a few nights prior to the incident of event. And while his children were sleeping in the bed with the mother and they woke up, he puts his fingers inside of her vagina forcefully.
Right.
Smells it and says, it smells like you've been having intercourse with another man. You're disgusting, or something to that effect. And then he proceeds to grab her keys and her credit cards, steals her car, empties out her bank account, and crashes the car. Now, once again, in all clarity of what happened, a few days later or weeks later, the birthday party happens for his son. And that's his baby mama. Yes, he violated her, and she filed a police report against him detailing what he did. But feelings are mixed. Emotions are mixed. They have children together. They've been together for decades. So she allows him to come to the kid's birthday party so that his son can see his dad. They still weren't in a relationship. She wanted nothing to do with him. She knew he had a warrant out for him based off of her allegations, but she let him come to the party in the hopes that he'd behave himself, see his kid, and leave. But everything else that we spoke about happened. They got into an argument. He gets verbally abusive. He steals her car, tries to steal the kids, and everything else happens. And she called the cops saying, "Listen, come get this guy."
Well, in my perspective on it, and the reason I tell the story that, because yeah, you're right. She did go ahead and tell him to come to the birthday party.
Yeah.
Is that I'm speaking from the police officer's perspective. They don't know what the hell he's doing
That's
there.
true. That's
Other
true.
than I got an open warrant and a restraining order. Yeah, dude, you need to come with us.
Right.
And of course he just didn't feel like being arrested that day.
Nope.
And the way that the whole story was reported was so crazy because they only
Right.
showed the video of the shooting and then they didn't reveal the rest of the video until much
Right.
later after they've gotten their grift money.
Yep.
That they did try to tackle him. They did try to wrestle him. They continued to try
tased
to
him.
wrestle him while he had a knife in his hand.
They tased him two or three times.
Right. So are they just supposed to let him leave with
Yep.
the kids and engage in a high-speed chase that could very easily get everyone killed?
Right.
Like, they don't have an answer for it, but it just, it was that's why some people call these guys, ambulance chasers, or like, and there's so many cases that are like this, but let's keep going.
This is true.
What would
So
you say if I
was
told you that police calls, 911 calls for violent crime make up approximately 5% of the calls that police departments get in every single
doesn't
city?
diminish the other
hold
call.
on. And you're exactly
Is that true?
It depends on where you are.
Right.
If you're working in a commercial area, the majority of crimes are going to be larceny related crimes, somebody stealing something. So that's not a blanket statistic that you can put on all police departments. 5% is absolutely bullcrap if you're in Chicago and you're on the South Side. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, I don't know. I don't know what she gets her statistics from. She might be right. Averaging out everything in America, it just sounds too low. But because larcenies are a lot. Like, larceny calls happen a lot. So when you see the volume of larceny calls, it could make violent calls seem lower statistically. But I just don't trust any of her numbers because so far all her numbers are just patently false. Bottom line
she's
is
been
yeah.
pretty crazy here. Yep. That's
Good.
Yep. So anyway,
You're right. There are about 10 million arrests per year. 80% of them are for nonviolent crimes. Less than 5% are for violent crimes. And your point is what?
My point is that if we stop utilizing police to be the answer to every single social ill we have, which, by the way, they're not very good at doing, we redirect those resources, pay people living wage jobs to be able to go out and respond to things like mental health crisis, to substance abuse issues, to towing cars, to animal control. Police will be able to respond to violent crime.
Well,
but
can I
that
say
is not
this,
what is
Dr.
happening,
Phil?
and you don't need over half of the city's general fund to just go focus on violent crime.
We have to take a break. When we come back, I have a question
There's
for
no
you.
police department where half of the city's funds go towards policing. It just doesn't happen. Like this, I don't, like I told you, even in New York, where the police budget is around 4 to 5 billion, where most of that is going into payroll and medical care. Remember, that's like over almost 200,000 people when you include retirees who have to get health care and pensions paid. So it's not most of those billions. If you ask anybody, if you go on their website and you see that their funding breakdown, most of those billions are paying for payroll and benefits. But even with that large agency, I keep talking about that agency because I'm from New York. Even from that large agency, that's $5 billion out of I think last year's budget for New York City was $105 billion. So there's still $100 billion that they've spent on everything else.
there's so many. I remember once, and I talk about this in my Truth About Police Shootings video. Like, remember they were using the word genocide?
Yeah.
Genocide. It's a genocide. I was like, so of the millions of police interactions, 259 people die. That is a very inefficient genocide. That is a genocide that is doing a very terrible job. Like, I just, but that's an example, though, is like the reason I bring that up is just there's so many different, this lady is like just pumping out blatant mistruths the whole time, but she does it very emotionally.
That's what they do.
Right. And if you try to challenge it at all, well, then you get called a racist or whatever.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, in my chat, Darla says, oh my God, someone in Strategic's chat, please explain to A Lady that police were first established in Boston. Nothing to do with slaves. I've heard this slave patrol thing before. Like, that's the only reason we have police. What I never really get an answer for is like, okay, so because at one point, I'm sure police officers were tasked with returning property, which at the time, unfortunately, would include other people who may be someone's property. So we shouldn't have police for that reason. Like,
yeah, it's an asinine statement. I mean, the guy who invented tampons performed horrendous experiments on African American women to perfect his technique. Are we collectively as a culture, or even African American women, going to stop using pads and tampons? You know, like just because it comes from a horrible, like every single German car worked for the Nazis. You know, like you're not going to drive your BM anymore. You know, Mercedes Benz, your Volkswagen. You know, like listen, we should know our history, we should understand it, but I think it's an asinine kind of like statement to make it seem like, well, just because this was the origin hundreds of years ago, that now for some reason what we're doing today is affected by it. And I don't even know if that's true. You know, we've had this argument before. A Lady has brought this up many times. You know, policing has, some people say, well, policing started in Boston. Policing in its various forms started in multiple areas as far as I understand.
Well, right. You know, well, that's the other reason why it seems so silly. It's like, are you trying to suggest that we did not police the populace ever before that? You're like, Roman society, they were called the Praetorians.
Yeah.
I'm like, so like before, you know,
Boston had the first organized police department where it's like, you're on payroll for the government, you got defined benefits, you know, like they had other patrols everywhere. You have to have some type of law and order because human beings need to be policed. They need it. Otherwise, we just go crazy. So, listen, you can keep popping her comments up if you want. I have nothing but love for her. She's been on my channel for 1,000 years. But you guys understand, she's a rabble rouser, and she's gonna keep pushing. So if you guys,
well, no, I just felt it was relevant to go ahead and debunk that because of the point that I've heard that point before, and it's relevant to what we're talking about.
All right, cool.
I told her off in your chat, and then I left it at that because I didn't want her to dominate the stream with this nonsense. But that was a relevant point because abolish the police people suggest that. I mean, I remember seeing the first clip where somebody talked about abolish the police. She was talking to Megyn Kelly. She's like, well, the police were just started because of slave patrol anyway, like, as if we didn't have anybody enforcing any other laws throughout the entire history of humanity. We didn't feel the need to have, say, sheriffs, which is a European term that goes back hundreds of years. You know, like, you know, it was like, you know, there's never anybody policing anything until there were slaves. You know, it's just not true. But anyway, let's continue.
We're also going to meet a local resident of a city just 7 miles from Rodeo Drive, the 10th most expensive street in the world. He says that 3 in 5 residents or business owners have been attacked, assaulted, robbed, or know someone who has. We'll be right back.
Crime increases, the city of Denver scrambling to hire more police officers. Denver has fewer officers today than it had in 2008, and it's impacting their ability to respond to your calls.
Our officers are struggling to address the 911 calls for service. We're seeing significant increases in homicides and shootings and burglaries. I have had officers that have retired recently that do point to elected officials that have stated defund, abolish the police. police department. We're looking for good people with big hearts that want to serve their community. That is it.
John, you live 20 minutes from this studio in Santa Monica, which is just 7 miles away from the second most expensive street in the country, 10th most expensive in the world, Rodeo Drive. Now, if you looked up Santa Monica in a guidebook a few years ago, it might have been described as a beautiful, family-friendly beach town with a long stretch of white beach, a shopping district, a pier, an amusement park. How would you describe it today?
Today, Dr. Phil, it's chaos. We don't have enough police. Right now, we should be at around 230, 240 for a population of 72,000 people. We're barely at 175. There's chaos at night. There's fires, there's shootings and stabbings. It's a dangerous area. Even city employees are being attacked.
I want to introduce y'all to a man who wouldn't even be sitting here today if it weren't for the police. He says he once feared the police until one talked him off the ledge, literally. He now dedicates his life to advocating for suicide prevention and law enforcement. So, Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Appreciate you, sir. Thanks for having me.
You had a life-changing experience with
Absolutely,
the
I
police.
did.
What happened?
March 11, 2005, I was overwhelmed. I had spent 22 years not dealing with my pain, lying about who I was. Born and raised in Oakland, California, never talked about mental health, never talked about anything that had anything to do about feelings, emotions, and I got overwhelmed that day. And I drove myself to the Golden Gate Bridge, and on that day, I literally got out there. The only thing that stopped me was that officer, who I never even know. At the time, I didn't even know he was an officer. I thought he was a human being. Later on, got to meet him 8 years later and found out he was an officer, and it changed my perspective of how I looked at law enforcement. I used to call them cops, now I call them law enforcement, because I realize they are human beings and they're flawed, and you know they make mistakes, but they're not trained. The key word of what he said, they're not trained for certain things. They're trained to handle. They're trained to supposedly handle situations, but they're not trained to handle how they feel about themselves.
Well, this is an important point that he's going to get into. Are you back yet, Strategic? Strategic had to step away for a second, but on my video about the truth about police shootings, one of the things I talk about at the end, there's a video that I recommend. It's a Joe Rogan clip. It's called Jocko Willink on Defund the Police. But anyway, Jocko was a Navy SEAL, so he knows a lot about training people to do something. And he pointed out that the way that police are trained is completely ineffective. Like, there's just not enough time given to them. And unfortunately, in order to do that, you would need, well, more funding, right? And one of the things he points out is that, you know, cops should probably have about 10% at least of their time should always be set aside for practicing their skills, whatever those skills may be, whether it's de-escalation tactics, hand-to-hand, so that they don't have to hurt anybody, skill in firearms. There should be a lot more time allotted for them to practice their skills, and it's never possible. Joe Rogan had on a woman who was a police psychologist. And she mentioned that, unfortunately, due to the budget, they only get to see her like maybe for 45 minutes a year to talk about these psychological issues and how best to resolve them peacefully. So if you want police that don't kill people, then you're going to need to fund them more, not less. Like, if you want them to be equipped with these skills, then it's going to cost more money, not less. So I hear you coughing. So you're back now. Just to tell you what you missed, this gentleman here had his life saved because a police officer talked him down when he was going to be committing suicide, and he pointed out that that he stopped calling them cops, he started calling them law enforcement, and then he feels that they're important to his community. So, did you want to comment on anything I just said? I don't know how much of it you heard.
I think I heard. I heard a very relevant part of it in terms of training, and I got to tell you, the training is terrible. I feel like I got more training when I went through my corrections academy, when I worked as a correction officer for over a decade, than when I became a police officer. One thing that the state of New York did with the corrections training is that they understood they only had a limited amount of time to teach you tactics. So they just taught you one or two moves to master. In a police department, every single day we learned something different, had some bullshit phony test about it to see if you can mimic the move you just saw, and you did it very sloppily, mind you, because you haven't had time to practice it beyond the day that you just spent in the gym doing it. And then they moved on to something else. Like, and then they told you, like, yo, this is your profession. It's incumbent onto you to go out on your own time and go take a kung fu class. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
If you're not a natural fighter. So we don't have time for training. They're right. We don't have time because we're understaffed. So you can't pull people out of patrol to go and do that 10% of your time defensive tactics that this Navy SEAL guy said that we should do. There's no staff, there's no money for training. So that's why you see people start doing desperate things once they start losing their wind. So everybody
Right.
has time to grapple with you and hold your hands and your legs and all that stuff until their energy is gone. Then psychologically, their fight and fright starts kicking in. And then they start escalating the violence to try and get the person under control. So if we did fully fund police, if we put enough police officers out there where police officers can get days off, police officers don't have to do forced overtime. Like, think about it. Even if I wanted to go out there and take, kung fu classes,
Right.
I tried it already. I mean, I know how to fight, just how to know how to fight as a person.
Right.
But I tried to, take jujitsu and all that different stuff so I could learn how to, smoothly take people down, right? I had to
Right.
cancel my membership because I never had time to go.
Yeah, and that's a real problem, and it should just be built into your already like day-to-day routine, is what Jocko Willink was talking about. And then there was another
that
one.
goes with funding. That goes with funding.
Right, which is what I was saying. And in addition to that, there was another one. It was actually Sam Harris interviewed Henner Gracie of the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu family, and he pointed out that he usually only gets to do a seminar once a year. And I'm a wrestling coach. You can't learn any grappling moves once a year. You got to do that stuff at least like a couple times a week for probably months. And you got to do it on live resisting opponents, or you really know it. You think you do, but it's not going to happen, especially not during an adrenaline dump. Like, just to get little kids to be able to do those maneuvers in a competition where they're not trying to kill each other is like a huge problem. Like, just to get them to do it in, at a tournament. Like, now you're trying to do it when somebody's trying to hurt you. Like, it requires so much more time and money. And I don't, in order to get the kind of police they want, that's the other thing is they often say, well, it should require a college degree. Like, oh, okay, so you're going to pay them a hell of a lot more then, right?
Right.
Because nobody's going to accept fast food wages with a college degree, right?
Right.
I do agree that they could do some more training. But the biggest thing that Jocko was trying to get at is, like, in the military, there's constant review. Like, and then they do things so regularly. Like, I remember, because I bring this up sometimes when I'm coaching wrestling, but like, they do it in SWAT, but they do it in the special forces. The strategy to clear a room, they do it again and again and again and again and again and again and again, like so many times every week, because that's something that you have to do under a heavy adrenaline. And if you do it wrong, you can get innocent people hurt, or you can get yourself killed.
Right.
That all takes time out of your week. And especially as they're going to point out here, in defunded police zones, everybody's getting overtime, which is one of the worst problems. Is that also makes the police so much more stressed and tired, or prone to make mistakes. So
yeah, and you're right. SWAT gets that training. Specialized units get those trainings, but SWAT and those specialized units oftentimes aren't the ones who are dealing with the street level crime where we see these tragedies happen.
Right.
So we need to open this up for everybody. And in a perfect world, it'd be, you got a 8-hour day, you're gonna spend 6 hours out on patrol, an hour on lunch, and before you clock out, you gotta put your sweats on and go up to the workout area where there's an in-house jujitsu or Gracie teacher, and you're gonna do an hour of defensive tactics before you go home.
Right.
And the only excusal is if you had an incident, if you just had a use of force, or you had, if you had something crazy going on, then we'll give you an excusal for the day. But if it's a normal day, this is part of your work day. This is part of you earning your check. Go
And
and do
this
your
is
thing.
why, if I'm elected president, you will be appointed to be the head of the Department of Justice.
I get nothing done. Those
They're trying to
FBI
figure
agents don't want to fight.
out their own lives alone with having this job that expects them not to be human.
Well, this is a point he was making that I interrupted, unfortunately, but he said he realized that cops also don't get the kind of help that they need, like as far as like to be able to keep themselves together. He's going to get into that here.
And I think that we have to understand their point of view too. Now that I've been on both sides of it.
So how long did this strain to you?
92 minutes.
Oh, specifically?
Yes, 92 minutes.
And he got you to walk away.
Dr. Phil, could I just speak to that for a second with law enforcement? Because most police officers die because of suicide that are on duty. They don't die because they're hit by a car. They don't die because they were shot by a suspect. They take their own lives. And when you defund the police, you prevent them from having enough money to provide themselves with the mental health services they need.
I'm sorry, law
Exactly
enforcement
like it.
officers make so much money. We've got officers in Oakland that are making between $350,000 to $420,000 a year. And brother, I'm so glad you were sitting here and that was your experience. The facts are, however, that upwards of 50% of people that are murdered by law enforcement are in the middle of a mental health crisis. And when you intersect that with blackness or brownness, the numbers go incredibly more up. So
How are you going to solve a mental health crisis? Hold on.
Let me ask this one question. You should send community like mental health.
How are you going to? Hold on a second. How are you going to address mental health by taking money away from police officers? How are you going to address mental health by taking money away from police officers? You're talking about two separate things. You're not talking about
by funding mental health
programs. Fund it, but don't take it from the cops.
I agree.
So,
There should be, if I might interject here, there does need to be an investment in people who can deal with people who are mental health crisis. And I would agree with you that maybe the officers aren't the best responder, but once a person's decided that, they're going to run around their apartment and chase people with a machete or whatever that thing is, where it becomes violent, you do need a police response. I wouldn't want my 30-year-old daughter to have to be,
I'll tell you why.
to come in.
Let me answer that from a mental health perspective. When you have someone in an agitated, even a psychotic episode, you truly need a mental health professional to deal with that. But there are times that those people become homicidal, become self-destructive, and you do need someone there with authority and the ability to stop that person in their tracks if that's what's necessary. But they're not the ones to be doing what you're talking about, and you're not ever going to train them to do that.
Exactly. Right. Nor do we want to.
He makes a valid point here that yes, you need mental health professionals, but just like the EMTs who don't go into violent areas without police, these mental health professionals are going to have cops with them.
Yeah.
Because who is going to deal with it? Like, as he pointed out, they become homicidal. It's like everybody acts like criminals are not dangerous somehow.
Well,
right?
you know what? What people, I think it's even more nuanced than that. What people don't get is that most people don't call the cops for their crazy uncle or their crazy son. They know that person is crazy. They have mental health issues. I know I'm using the wrong terminology by saying crazy. Whatever. Mentally ill. They usually know how to deal with it. They only call the cops when it becomes on a level that they can't deal with, when they feel personally threatened. So by the virtue of police being called, 911 being called, it's already to that level where that person feels like their safety is in danger. And I've said this from day one when they were talking about this whole send counselors out and all that stuff. I said, you're going to send the counselors out. Number one, you got to pay them significantly more than police officers because they're clinicians. But you're going to send them out, and then one of them is going to get hurt. So then you're going to say, you know what? This person had nothing but a pen and a pad, and the crazy person took the pen and stabbed them with it. So how about we just give them tasers too, right? Then you're going to give them the taser, and then it's going to be a winter night that they're going to respond to something, and then that person is going to use the taser. It's going to be ineffective because the person had a big bubble coat on and the prongs couldn't connect. Then you're going to say, wow, man, that was a close one. They got away safely, but tasers aren't the all end all be all. So let's give them pepper spray, right? Then you're going to give them the pepper spray. Then something's going to happen. Then you're going to say, you know what? We need to give them guns because you know what? That person had a knife and we lost a 20-year-old beautiful counselor to this crazy person. And then what do you have now? You just have a highly trained cop.
Right.
Once you give them the guns.
Right.
So this whole notion that counselors are going to save everything and stop all, these instances of uses of force is just bullshit, because by the time the cops are called, that person is already on a level of crisis where the people who love him, the people or her, the people who are around them already feel like their lives are in danger and it's too much for them to handle.
Do you remember that story when this woman went off on BLM because like the guy that got shot by cops had literally fired rounds into her apartment with her
Absolutely.
kid?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, so they were there to protest, and then they looked really, really stupid when she explained everything.
Yeah.
And they got really, really awkward. They're like, man, maybe we don't want to try to get donations from this one.
Right. Yeah, but some of them were being very disrespectful to her.
Right.
Some of them told her to shut up. Some of them tried to call her a white woman, even though she was a racially ambiguous woman. She said she was Spanish, black, white, American,
Right.
Indian. She said everything. But her children were biracial. Their fathers or father was African American through and through.
Right. Right.
And then the video came out, and we're watching this guy shooting at her house. We're watching the police say, "All right, run through here, come to us to the staircase." And when the last child goes through the staircase, a bullet hole goes through the door.
Right.
Could have went right through that kid's head.
Right.
What does it take for us to stop, automatically giving deference to the bad guys?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you literally have to see them trying to kill a person for you to say, okay, well, maybe not this one. Well, how about you just wait until you get the information before you make a judgment?
Right. Before you show up outside the lady's house to protest.
Meanwhile, she can't even get into her apartment. Her kids can't get clean drawers. She can't get her ID and her money. Why? Because it's a crime scene.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Unbelievable.
That was definitely one of my favorites / least favorites. But anyway, let's go on.
What's crucial about your story that you just told was that you said for 22 years, you did not feel like you had a place to talk about your feelings.
Absolutely not.
When we talk about policing, we're already too late. At every issue, at every junction, we're talking about something that's too late, that we have not funded, that we have not addressed as a social ill, that we have defunded over and over again. If we're talking about a police officer responding to a rape, there's already been a rape. That's the problem.
Stop
and the
that right there.
police
Stop that right
officer
there.
did
Stop
not
that right
prevent.
there.
I was going to let him finish, but yes, I know exactly where you're headed. Go ahead.
Like, this is so stupid what he's saying. Because the police, so what is he saying? We should find a way to stop the rape before it happens? But either way, that victim needs justice.
Right.
And police are the only ones who are equipped with the training and the technology to actually catch that person and save future victims from being victimized, and at the very least giving that victim the justice that they deserve. Like, these guys live in a utopia world where they think that we could just stop the evil in people's hearts. They like inherently believe that everybody's good. That's just not the case.
Right.
It's not the case. Some people are just freaking evil, man. Jeez.
And this comes from the argument that they make that police do not prevent crime. And what I always say to them, and it'll just get you laugh reacts and laugh emotes because they don't have an answer for this, is that if there is a repeat offender, which happens all the time, and he is in prison instead of on the street, he is being prevented from committing more crime. Duh. Right? Like, yes, you maybe they don't prevent all of them, but if you put somebody behind bars, you're preventing anything else that guy would do, right? Or a girl, as the case.
So in policing, we use data to kind of tackle crime. So if this CVS has been robbed, or larcenies have happened there a dozen times in the last week, and you put a patrol car in front of that CVS, watch how that prevents crime. Nobody's going in there to rob the CVS if there's a police car right outside of it. But nobody. When I go to work, they're not telling us to go prevent crimes. They're saying go out there and save lives.
Right.
It's impossible to prevent crime.
how many times do police officers stop somebody before he kills anyone? I mean, obviously, they, you know, in the story we were just talking about, the police prevented crimes because if that guy had had his way, he'd have killed that child and the woman and
Right.
everybody else in that room.
Yeah.
But we're not preventing any crimes. You know, like I get, you know, some of what he thinks he's saying, but again, like you said, it's a utopian, weird dream world that they live in.
Yeah.
And they put the cart before the way before the horse, right?
Right.
I'm in favor of like I don't think closing our mental health facilities down was a good move at all.
No,
You know,
it's not.
I definitely think there are far too many mentally ill people walking around on the street, but they don't ever seem to. It's like, you know, as you and I've discussed many times, their victims are not included in the calculus. Like they're not included in the math here.
Right.
The victims don't exist. Just the criminals as victims exist in this narrative. That's why, like, when you reviewed that crazy video of Joy Reid and Robbie arguing about this, it was like, to them, like at one point the woman from Twitter literally was like, you know, he's like, well, they need to be put behind bars if they're hurting people, and she's like, why? She's literally like, why? Like, because they're hurting people, you freaking moron.
Right.
Like, I just like, so you think that because the system sucks that we should just let these people hurt whoever they want?
But she doesn't believe it though, V. She's being paid to say that, because I've dealt with folks like that.
Right.
They're the first ones to call the police and say, hey, there's a guy who's sitting on the stoop in front of my house.
Right.
It's all propaganda. I think we need to expose these people and weed out this agenda that exists that pays people to lie about how they truly feel. Once we get the false narratives out of the conversation, I think we'll start having a real conversation on how we actually solve these things.
Absolutely.
There's a financial incentive that exists, V, and that's what's destroying this country. Big money.
Yeah, I agree. Let's go on.
Prevent that. The funding for the police officers did not prevent that.
Well,
So
you may be correct on that.
what we're talking about is that the police, when I say defund the police, what I am saying is that there's so much going to the police. I'm saying, can you take some of it? Some of it,
I would
and give it
agree.
to other things,
That there needs
so
to
that
be
we are
investment
preventing, because
in
police
other
do not
areas.
prevent. They are not enough of a deterrent to prevent the things that...
You're driving down the freeway and you see a highway patrol officer on the freeway, you slow down.
No,
That's a deterrent.
many people don't.
No, they
No,
slow down.
they slow down.
And when
Shut up. I slow down. You know why I slow down? Because I don't want to get pulled over. Because even though when I get pulled over, it's like, yeah, all right, you know, have a good day. I still had to waste 5 minutes before the guy comes up to the car and we have our conversation. Everybody slows. Cops slow down. But this guy's a professor at John Jay Criminal Justice School, one of these schools in New York.
Jesus.
He's a professor. Not John Jay. I don't know where he's at. In one of the New York City schools, like the New York City colleges or whatever it is. I think they're called CUNYs or something. He's a professor there. He's a full-blown professor there, tenured.
Wow.
This guy's indoctrinated. This is why we have these purple-haired weirdos running down the streets, destroying everything. Because they're being taught by guys like this. It's bananas.
And despite propaganda you may have heard from Black Sheepdog, my hair is not, in fact, purple, just so we're clear. Let's keep going.
when you see a cop in a parking lot, people will probably not want to do a crime right when their cop is there. You need more police.
You would need police
We don't have
everywhere
enough.
then, if that's the scenario that you lay out.
If you want to, the issue you're bringing up is there hasn't been enough investment in mental health. There has not been enough. We need to
lots
invest
of
more.
things, not just mental health. We're
that's
talking,
fine,
we're
but
talking about housing.
I think what the issue is that it doesn't have to be either or.
But it
we
does
need to
right now.
recognize.
No, you're right. It doesn't. I'm sorry. It doesn't need to be
to
either
recognize
or. But right now, the police, the either or
police
is
service,
it's just
and we
the
also
police.
need to recognize
Oakland,
the value
Department of
of these
Violence
other
Prevention
systems.
gets $17 million.
If you would
OPD
allow me
gets
to finish, because I will sit here and listen to you as long as you'd like.
I just want the truth to be told.
And I would do nothing but tell the truth.
But you're not.
It doesn't have to be one or
You're
the
not.
other.
They're like this passive-aggressive bullshit. But you're not.
And he said shit that was just obviously preposterous through this entire thing. I just,
In conference with the United States Surgeon General this morning, talking about the very thing you guys are talking about, that emphasis needs to be put in these areas, and it's not either or. So where do we go from here? What is the solution? Is there a solution? I'm the incurable optimist.
Me too.
We'll be right back. I mentioned that I was speaking with Dr. Murthy this morning about what you guys are saying, and it doesn't need to be either or. There's a point at which law enforcement and public health intersect. And you're talking about a public health issue, and you guys are talking about a law enforcement issue, and both of them are legitimate societal needs.
Yep.
And Michael, you're not saying we don't need police, that
Oh, I am.
if someone is
so zesty, bro.
doing a home invasion, or
I am.
Oh, I am. Yeah, we don't need
So
police.
zesty.
Yep. Oh, I am. Yeah, that's right.
It's like, yeah, babies.
This is nothing sexier than the purge. Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
yes.
Okay, anyway.
or committing an, you don't think there's a role for police to intervene?
What your question is presuming is a world as it exists currently, right?
Well, yeah, what else would we be talking about, genius? Anyway, sorry.
And so when I say, oh, I don't believe there's a role that there's a need for police, what I'm saying is that there has been so little investment in creating the conditions under which police would not be necessary. And that is the issue. That is the holistic issue. And people are creations of the society in which they live in. And if you are a society that has such massive inequality, and you are a society that is based on racial and gendered hierarchies, and you are a society that deprives people of the resources that they need to live, talking about housing, clean water, food, all of these things that are part of an equitable society. You're talking about people that will do desperate things in order to survive. And so you're not solving.
This is the narrative that we were just talking about. Like, he's acting like there's just massively, enormous numbers of starving people who have no housing. Like, this is what the New Deal did. The New Deal is the reason this doesn't happen anymore. And the people who are homeless, it sucks. And I'm not in any way playing down, but as you pointed out on your show more than once, some people literally just want to live like that. Like, they legit want to be homeless.
That's very true.
And
a lot of them are mentally ill.
Yeah, a lot of them are mentally ill, and that's the situation. I think we should help those people.
Yeah.
Comes back to the fact that I don't support Reagan shutting down the frickin' mental institutions at all. But at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that, these criminals exist and they're going to hurt people. Yeah. And the rest of this stuff, it's like, he's like, well, you're presuming the world is the way it is now. I'm like, well, yeah, it is that way now. Like that's where else are we going to be? And again, I think you and I would both agree that, helping to address poverty will certainly curb all of this.
Yeah.
But the social transition that needs to happen, in not glorifying, violent crime, and not glorifying criminals, and not glorifying gang members, et cetera, that's going to be a change that should be getting a hell of a lot more mental energy than trying to, I don't know, get critical race theory in schools, in places that it isn't going to do anything. It's not going to change anything. It's not going to help anything. That's I guess what I'm worried about, is that the stuff that they're pushing doesn't help anyone. So, anyway.
Yeah.
Solving anything by arresting those people. You are not solving anything by shooting and killing those people.
I agree with you 100% on society's failures about how that person became a criminal. My point is, we also live in the here and now.
Right.
And if someone invades my home and has my wife held hostage in the bedroom tonight, I don't give two about where they came from tonight. What I care about is a solution tonight. That doesn't mean that we don't need to solve the problem so my grandchildren don't get held hostage in their bedrooms 20 years from now. But when you say we don't need police because of developmental failures, that doesn't solve the problems that are occurring tonight, tomorrow night, the next night. Those things have to be dealt with.
I hear you.
Well said.
I truly, and I'm not being, I hear you. That is the fear that continues to drive us toward more
No,
policing.
that is the reality in which
That
we
is the
live.
fear-
That's not
that
a
is-
fear.
yes,
Fear
yes, it is
the
fear
anxiety or
based on an
anticipation of
understanding
something
that
that
could
may
be there.
happen. What I'm describing is something that is happening, and we have to have guardrails. We have to have someone to turn to. We have to have someone on the end of 911. Talk to me about your son-in-law.
So I was basically a person who 10 years ago, if you asked me if there were racial issues or inequalities or if certain people were targeted more than others, I was naive and I would say, oh, absolutely not. But fast forward, my kids are now grown. My daughter's married to an African-American man. And it amazes me how much time is spent interacting with him when he doesn't need to be interacted with. If she gets pulled over for a speeding ticket and he's in the passenger seat, you can bet he's going to come out of the passenger seat. He's going to get checked out. And that would not happen to me if I got pulled over and my boyfriend was in the car with me because he's a white middle-aged man. And my fear is that now I have grandchildren who are, you know, biracial, but if they're not with me or with my daughter, they're identified as African-American children. And their dad thinks that they have to be above reproach on everything they do or else their life depends on it.
I understand that completely. I have grandchildren too.
Right.
They're biracial as well. So those issues, I'm not negating them. They're actually real issues. Here's where we disagree a little bit. I don't think that you can just land all those racial issues or put them on the police department itself. Because police departments recruit from society.
That's
and in
right.
fact, I would argue that there are much more stringent vetting of police officers than, say, your school teachers, your medical doctor, your bus driver, your postal worker.
All of those other professions do not have the ability to make a decision in a half a second of whether they're going to shoot somebody or not.
But
and
they
that's
have
the
the
difference.
ability
Lori,
to-
actually,
yeah.
for bringing us back to the point, because
Yeah.
I want to do something
But
I
they
should
do
have done
have
at
the
the top of
ability
the
to
show.
affect the
Natasha
life
McKenna,
They absolutely
Tamir
do.
Rice,
They do.
Grishario Mack, Oscar Grant,
Oh, here we
Mario
go, the
Woods. I
shaming.
could go on and on, because what I do every day, is hold or listen to or comfort women that have been raped and families that have lost their loved ones to the unthinkable. That is
raped
what
them?
happens. And
Who
so when
killed
we
them?
talk
Right? I
Who
was
raped
just
them and
gonna
who killed
say,
them?
I imagine that she's going to say police officers, but in comparison, like, you know, you have to remember that we talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
The victims of violent crime are invisible.
Yeah.
You know, they don't exist. It's just the crime, you know, it's the violence met out against the people who are doing these things that we need to focus on.
talk about law enforcement's humanity, I understand we need to have that conversation, and I'd agree that we need to deal with their trauma. But when they're having a human moment, that far too often means we end up dead.
But let me explain something that's going to happen if you defund the police.
Far too often. Like, it kind of comes down to the fact that, again, as you and I already stated multiple times, we want the number of innocent people shot by police to be down to as close to zero as physically, humanly possible.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't change the fact that she's not going to want to focus on the cultural issues that lead to, you know, like 51% of the violent crime, you know, being committed by one demographic. She's not going to want to talk about that element of it that inevitably leads to far more police interactions.
That's right.
She's never going to want to investigate it. Or if she does, she's going to immediately blame it only on poverty. And there's, as we both acknowledge, there's something to that. But there's a lot of crimes that, as we just pointed out, have nothing to do with poverty. They don't have anything to do with, I don't have anything to eat. They don't have anything to do with, you know, I don't have a home. They have everything to do with the fact that I come from a culture that venerates hurting people for dissing me or talking to my girl or whatever. The solution needs to be that I head down the street and show everyone what a macho guy I am and kill
Right.
them.
That's right. And it's just it's a fact that nobody wants to talk about. It's in the music, it's in the movies,
Right.
it's everywhere. It's played on radio.
Right.
It's everywhere. And that is the basis of what is indoctrinating these children into destroying themselves and is
Right.
destroying these communities. And then yeah, poverty doesn't help, but it's not the only thing. But nobody wants to be held accountable for it, because when we start having that conversation, we got to look within. We can't
Right.
blame anybody else. You can't blame the white man that this smart African American kid goes to talk to this beautiful African American girl from his community, and she's like, "You're a nerd. I'm not interested." Or he might go home and he's doing his homework, and his uncle or his dad might say, "Well, what are you, uppity? Who do you think you are?"
Right.
These
Now-
are social issues, cultural issues that we have to conquer. Because if you're in the Asian community, the smart guy is the desirable guy. The smart guy is the one that gets the first pick of the women. If you're in
Right.
the Indian community, as in Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, that descent, same thing. The software coding guy is going to get first pick at the women. All right. If you're in the Jewish community, the doctor gets first pick, the lawyer gets second pick, everybody else gets third pick. And if you were any other profession but those professions and you're not making $1 million, then you're a failure.
Right.
It's only in the African American community and Latino community that are in the inner cities, not all black people, not all black people,
Right.
but people who have bought into hip hop culture, inner city poverty culture. It's only in that culture where it's acceptable to be a failure. It's acceptable to be a gangster and a thug, a convict, a criminal, where you're respected and loved, even though your pastime is hurting people and victimizing your community. Only in that community, in those micro societies, is that acceptable. If you go to black people in the suburbs, that does not fly. That doesn't exist. They
Right.
follow the same trajectory of everybody else. You go to school, you go to college, you get a profession, you take care of your family. But the problem with the black community is the inner city hip hop culture of violence is the only one that gets covered by the media. It's
In
the only
addition-
one that's glorified by the media.
Well, and then you can also look at the contradiction that comes up inevitably when African immigrants come over here.
Yeah.
Many of them have the same work ethic that the Asian community has, and then they end up flourishing.
Oh yeah.
Like one of my doctors was from Africa. He was excellent, and he came over here, got his education. Like we moved away, so he's not my doctor anymore, but he would
Right.
be if we still lived there. The point is like they had this amazing work ethic, and it's just crazy to me that how is it then that if it's supposedly just about black people specifically and it has nothing to do with anything going on in the African American community itself or anything about their values or their culture, then why is it that black immigrants can come over here and somehow not have that problem, or at least nowhere near as much? The stuff that they're talking about profiling and racism, I'm not saying that none of that doesn't exist anymore, but I do think that one of the things they don't generally also mention is that if you get profiled as a poor white person, you're going to get followed in stores. It was extremely ironic, strategic. I need to tell you this story because it's so fun. I was at a Big and Tall clothing store, right? And I generally, because I just don't care what I look like anymore, I dress poor, more or less. And so the two ladies that were working there happened to be black. And so I asked about some clothing, and because if you're a big guy like me, the clothing is very expensive. So I ask about where the jackets are. I go get one, and then this lady's asking me if she can hold my stuff. Can I take that to the counter for you? And I'm like, I'm being profiled right now.
Yeah, you are.
Like I just didn't say anything about it. I'm like, no, that's okay. I got it, And she's just following me around the store because, again, I wear really cheap clothing, like,
Right.
And I just was like, it was so ironic to me that was happening. And I doubt that I don't, what the funny thing is that I doubt that person even realized that's the irony of the situation.
But the thing is that we all profile.
Right.
Profiling is acceptable in law enforcement. Law enforcement doesn't care what the activists say. When you're in the academy, say, listen, I don't care what you heard. I said, we profile. Everybody profiles because that's the only way. I mean, there's other ways, but I just give you an example. If you're in a high crime community, you see a guy walking down the street with his pants below his butt, with a bulge in the front of his pants, he's holding the front of his pants up, and he's walking with a big old bop, and he's looking around suspiciously. Guess what? 9 times out of 10, the people that we've seen do that usually have guns on them. So it's only natural to say, oh, you know what? Let me watch that guy because he fits the mold of somebody who would have a gun. You just profiled that person. When a Caucasian meth addict comes into the CVS or the Rite Aid, 9 times out of 10, they're a thief because they're going to be stealing to support their habit.
Right.
Maybe they just have bad acne and bad teeth, but you're going to assume, you know what? Maybe that's, I'm profiling. That person might fits the mold of the people who came into this store 20 times before they came in and ended up stealing. It's natural to profile. The issue is when it gets out of hand. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the funny thing about what you just pointed out, though, about that profile about the gangbanger, you didn't even mention the kid's race because it isn't relevant. Like there are Asian gangs, there are white gangs, white anybody who's dressed like you're talking about is going to get profiled.
Absolutely.
I used to get profiled as a drug addict because I had long hair and torn jeans and metal T-shirts. And yes, there are plenty of kids who get into drugs, do that stuff. I wasn't one of them, right? But there's a certain profile that goes along, with people who dress like that. And the reason I pointed out that the race wasn't relevant is that you literally just identified essentially like what are the trappings of a gangland criminal, and they come in all colors.
Yes, they do.
That was one of the things about the film Gran Torino that I really liked was that they illustrated that Asians are caught up in this stuff sometimes too. Like the Hmong gangs in that film. I was like, yep, I remember them, because they were there. The Hispanic gangs were there and the black gangs were there, and then white kids would figure out where they could fit into the system as far as, gang members were concerned. And the funny thing is I had more problems with them generally because they were trying to prove to everyone how hood they were.
Right.
So they needed to beat up the white boy. It was so hilarious. But anyway, yeah. So I guess let's keep going. I know you've been here for a while. We're almost done.
Cool.
Some other organization is going to take over the responsibility. And it's either going to be a gang, organized crime. It could be anybody. But if you defund the police and you have people feeling less safe in their neighborhood, somebody is going to patrol that neighborhood, and you may not like what they do.
Desmond, what do you want to say?
She knows how she didn't have anything to say about that.
Of course not.
She looked kind of nervous. I was like, well, yeah, I know exactly who will take over, and you're not going to like what they do. They're going to human traffic your daughters. They're going to behead your father for arguing with them on television.
That's right.
These people have no idea what they're getting into.
We need to be, in my opinion, as somebody who studies education, a little bit more careful because I know it's hard to remember, but we actually are on the same side here. Do we want a safer community? Same side as far as my concern, right? So it's now gotten to the point, though, where there is so much
that person like
unedited
androgynous. How do you say it?
I don't know, but at least they're being somewhat rational.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just confused, but go ahead, let's keep going.
Yeah,
worsening the problem based on how we're working, right? We have defund the police. We have somebody in education. I have students saying, oh yeah, we do not need a police force at all right now. There is a here and now where we do need police force. There's also preventative measures that we can take in education, right? That can prevent these things from happening in the first place.
And maybe keep them in school.
Yeah, let's vote for this person for president.
Well,
that's like the most rational person on the stage. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's other rational people on the stage, but I mean, they just broke it down. The here and now. Like, listen, we all would like a society that doesn't need police.
Right.
Like, yeah, some of us are going to need different jobs and have to retool, but we would love that because then we would not have to worry about our children getting hurt.
Right.
But we're not there yet. We may never get there. What about the here and now? What world does this guy live in with the glasses?
Right.
He's like, is he serious? Like, I'm not. I may not even be as learned as this guy. I'm pretty sure he probably has his PhD if he's a professor. But like, why does he not seem rational to me? And he's supposedly so much more learned than me. I don't know. What am I?
I think
What
a
am I
lot
missing?
of it has to do with the fact that, and I just had a sociologist on my show. You should check out that stream if you haven't. But he was sounding the alarm about how so many of these social sciences that these people are PhDs in have been completely corrupted by activism.
I think
And
I
it's
watched it. You talking about with Peter, but
well, no, I had him on, and then I
Oh,
had another guy on
okay.
recently who's a very well published sociology professor,
Okay.
and he wrote books, and he's literally just blackpilled about all of it. He's just given up because he thinks sociology is dead, and that's
Right.
studying and understanding people and groups and interacting. Right, that's a really critical science.
Yeah.
But he pointed out that it's just totally taken over, and he's like, it's not that I don't. He's left leaning. He has left leaning political ideology.
Yeah.
He felt it was extremely careful to not ever impart that on his students, but
Mm.
also that you have to have real research that has tangible results. You can't just go off your opinions, and that's what these people are doing. And the funny thing
Right.
is that now you can get what Peter Boghossian was pointing out is you can get papers published with your freaking opinion, and if it's popular with the right journal, they'll publish it as if you released a scientific paper, right?
Right. Yeah.
The whole process is corrupted, and that's the reason why you're listening to this professor who thinks probably that they're speaking from an educated perspective when they're really speaking fantasy land. There's no
Right.
science to back up what this person is saying will just work if you just throw a lever and turn off police tomorrow.
Right.
So anyway,
Is working together that out of the question?
When you've got law enforcement agencies that target people like me with misinformation and lies and put targets on our back, I don't know how then I sit down at the table with that person.
Okay, Val, let
Well,
me
you can
respond,
always
though.
sit down, but
I mean, I've asked.
and this is a discussion here. I wanted you here.
I know.
I asked you to come here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
All right,
Don't
we've
happen
been
often.
discussing defunding the police. What happened and what needs to happen now? I said I was going to share with you where I saw this. I'm going to do that after the break.
oh, strategic! Did you see that purple-haired person?
Where? I was over here reading the comment section. Go
Oh,
back.
no, here we go. Oh yeah, you got to see. Your boogeyman is in the crowd. There she is.
Oh my God, bro. They're everywhere, kid. They're like the body snatchers.
Well, we've barely scratched the surface, and we're really out of time. I said tell you where I stand on this issue before we were done today. I stand on the data. Crime is up. Preliminary facts are clear. The spike in crime is not due to any one factor. Nothing ever is. The so-called defunding of police departments is certainly not responsible, but may have had some multi-level indirect impact. Lesser number of officers, lesser enforcement, a lesser show of force. Did those things matter? A disrespectful attitude towards police. They certainly feel it. Poor morale by officers. That's undeniable. They're less proactive. An unwillingness to expose themselves with every action under hyper scrutiny. Crime was also up in cities where police department budgets were increased. The spike is sadly not a tough mystery if you really stick with the data and focus on human nature. Stress and a sense of chaos were and are big contributors. Look, over 94 million Americans were infected with COVID-19. Over 1 million people died. 4 of the top 10 stressors in life are death of a spouse, death of a family member, major injury or illness, and loss of a job. Desperate times, desperate people do desperate things. Normal rules, even laws, seem to no longer apply, and crime can spike. You can't put it on one thing. Overlay all of this with turmoil, with some very high-profile bad policing, as in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and law enforcement in general, not just a few inarguably bad cops, can be a ready target to vent. Defund those bastards, shut them down. Derek Chauvin sure as hell needed shutting down, and was, along with some others around the country that did not deserve to wear the badge. But there are approximately 800,000 men and women police officers in America, most of whom were as appalled at what happened as you and I. Defund their departments and we would have chaos. No one ever said get rid of them all. Most just said retrain.
Well, except for the founders of Black Lives Matter.
That's a fact.
Right, but anyway.
Because the roots of crime start in childhood, in neighborhoods, with bad or absent role models, bad crowds. They are exactly right on both counts. Retraining's great to a degree, but trying to get officers to wear too many hats can be very dangerous. Police officers are called to enforce the law. They don't make the laws. They aren't there to empathize with why someone is breaking the law. They're there to suppress criminal behavior and protect everyone involved quickly and safely. It's not always pretty. You do not want them doing therapy or analysis on the scene. You want calm, unbiased efficiency. Everyone can always do better. Cops do need constant training and measured accountability. For our part of this equation, we need to recognize the loudest voice does not always deserve the most attention. Never substitute for your own thinking that of others just because they are loud, especially social media messaging, network spin, or bullhorns in the street just because they have a slogan that rhymes. Look at the data, be critical, evaluative thinkers, hold out for independent facts, not just emotions and headlines. Cops are not the enemy, neither are they perfect. But they do get up every morning and put themselves in harm's way to keep us safe. And last year, 129 of them were killed in the line of duty.
Right.
24 in non-disputed, unprovoked attacks. Harm's way is for real. Many now feel unappreciated, even hated and vilified. Morale is at an all-time low. Resignations and retirements at an all-time high. We are literally running off the very people who stand between us and chaos. We have to own our end of this. It's not about winning an argument, it's about solving a problem. Personally, I try and never pass an officer on the sidewalk without shaking their hand and telling them how much I appreciate them doing what they do. Response? Hey, Doc, thank you for saying that. We sure don't hear it much, if at all, these days. It means a lot. Next time you pass a cop, give it a try. The data is clear. Defunding police was not an answer. When a bad officer pops up, abusive, badge-heavy, racist, trigger-happy, or all the above, I will be the first to call them out. As for the vast majority, they are mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, just like you and me. We are all in this together. We need a good intersection of law enforcement and mental health. It's not either or. Let's commit to getting the mental health part up where it needs to be. Police officers don't want to try to do those jobs. They want to support and partner with people that are trained to do it. We just need to get the funding so they can. That's my 2 cents worth.
See who's not clapping?
Activists.
Right.
Look at that. And you know what? That shows how
They were shifting
uncivil,
uncomfortably through that whole thing. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, it
Sorry.
shows how uncivil some of these folks are. Like he allowed you to come on his show and he gave you a platform to say whatever you wanted to say with minimal interruption. In fact, the people who were, if we could say it, pro-police, because nobody was really pro-police. Everyone was just, it was very nuanced, nuanced views. But the people who will say were pro-police, those individuals oftentimes got talked over or interrupted. Constantly. And Dr. Phil allowed you to do that and was gracious enough to share his platform with you. And you don't even have the grace to clap and just end this divisive conversation, you know what I'm saying, on a positive note.
Right. Well, I think you could see how uncomfortable they were. That's what I was trying to say. Like, they were both shifting in their seats and The professor with the glasses in particular looked really disappointed because I think he thought like he was winning somebody over or whatever. But Dr. Phil was very even-handed about it.
Yeah.
I mean, he admitted a lot of stuff, and I think that funny thing is I heard he just retired, and it's weird because he did all these contentious things before he did. And I feel it's just like he's been, because his position on that show has been, I kind of just let people talk and I try to moderate and I stay out of it. But you got to imagine it's got to be maddening,
Right.
to like sit there and just let people do the talking. Super chat from Federal Methodist, 10 for $10. In light of defund, abolish the police growing, several patriotic fraternal organizations in my area are eager to fill the void. The Latin Kings, we have those in Detroit, Bloods and Crips, etc. We expect vigorous competition. So the gangs popping up specifically to do exactly what that cop was pointing out would happen.
Right.
Every friend of mine that joined a gang, and all of them did from when I was growing up there, they all did it for personal protection.
Yeah.
That's the funny thing, is that they joined violent gangs to keep themselves safe.
Yeah.
And it's like, so the things you're expected to do to be members of those gangs are illegal.
Yeah.
And some of them you have to prove, you got to kill somebody, to get in.
And
It's like,
it's a real phenomenon, because I had a discussion with a victim of DV from a very high profile case, and to this day I thank her for sharing her time with me on my show, because I got a small show. She could have went anywhere with her story. And I asked her, I said, why do such beautiful women get with these bad guys, the people who are known to be the thugs and all that? And she said, listen, when you're growing up in a severely impoverished, dangerous community, and you're working odd hours in your part-time job, and you're coming home by yourself, and guys are, making comments to you. Some of them are, hey, you're pretty, and some of them are like, yeah, I want you. I might take it. It's
Right.
natural to get with the bad guy, because he may be a thug and a gangster and even a murderer to everybody else, but to you, he treats you good. And it's just as much as protection as it is being attracted to the bad guy. If when everybody knows that your boyfriend is Jack, the gangster, nobody's gonna mess with you.
Right.
So now you're walking home in the nighttime and nobody's saying anything to you, because they don't want to incur the wrath of Jack. Because if somebody says, hey, you got a nice butt, you go tell Jack, that person gets dealt with. It's the same thing with what you just said. All your friends joined those gangs for protection, but nobody wants to talk about how can we put those gangs out of business? How can we change the culture of violence in those communities where people can feel safe to live in those communities and not have to join those gangs in order to feel safe?
Right. So now that we've finished that, what is our general takeaway? And I'm going to let you go first here on just like what was discussed during this episode.
Delusional. It's just delusions. People who think that we live in a utopian society and that people are capable of policing themselves. And, it's just, I think nothing was solved in the conversation besides rational people seeing this conversation for what it really was, and irrational people finding excuses to probably denounce what was obvious to everybody else in this video. And I think nothing was accomplished, but I definitely think that what we see is the problem that we have in this country right now. The very fact that these folks were allowed on the Dr. Phil show, which is a nationally syndicated show, to have a nonsensical conversation about an imaginary world that does not exist is the problem. We keep giving these folks a platform. We're giving them a platform. We're not talking to the people on the ground level. We're not talking to the people in Brownsville, Brooklyn. We're not talking about to the people in Rochester, New York, Buffalo, New York, Detroit, Memphis. We're not talking to these folks. We're talking to the people who have nothing in common with them. On that stage was an activist who makes her living being an activist, and a New York City professor who pulls in a 6-figure salary.
Right.
What connection do these
I'm
people
sure he
have?
gets the struggle.
Yeah. What connection do these folks have to the ground level right now?
Yep. That was what I remember when it was there was this huge thing on campus. I want to say at like Yale. And there's this crazy scene where you're watching all these kids of color accost this white professor and tell him how racist and evil he is. And I'm just thinking to myself through the whole thing, I'm like, you're going to Yale.
Yes.
I was like, you're at Yale.
You're the
So there's
leaders.
Princeton and Yale. Those are the two big schools. You're at Yale. The only way my kids are going to college is with an athletic scholarship or an academic one.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
I'm like, the notion that they're so oppressed, I just it's so mind numbing to me that they could literally believe that and say that and not be conscious or self-aware enough of where they really are in society. But
You know, I
like,
got a similar interesting story, and then I gotta get the hell out of here. We got
go
to
ahead.
wrap it up.
Yeah, no, we were almost
This is
done.
almost,
Yeah,
this is
you
hilarious.
stayed with me for a long time.
This is so hilarious.
Go ahead.
So I had to get welfare for a very short time. I was ended up denied. When I was young, I had lost my job. It's a heavy story. Whatever. I'll get into it on my channel one of these days about what happened. My first law enforcement gig. So I had to resign from the job, and I go to social services because I had gotten into a car accident a month before, and I used my savings to fix my car because I just had liability. And I'm like, oh, I got a job. I'll rebuild those savings. And then I had to resign because my supervisor didn't like me and gave me a bad review or whatever. Turns out I had to go into it because I don't want people speculating that I'm not a good employee. It turns out this guy was sexually harassing me and saying crazy stuff that just you shouldn't say. Like he'd come up to me like, hey, strategic, would you give a guy a blowjob for $20 million? And I'm like, yo, at this time I'm like a 20-something-year-old kid from Harlem. So I'm like, yo, don't talk to me like that, man. Like, it's just a joke. It's a question. Like, yo, but don't talk to me like that, man. What's wrong with you? So he didn't like that. They come like, hey, how's your girlfriend treating you? Like, why are you asking me how my girlfriend's treating me? Like, what's up with this guy right here? Would you let a guy do you in your booty for $50 million? I'm like, yo, no. My sexuality is not to be bought. What is wrong with you, guy?
What
So
the hell, bro?
So because one day I pulled him aside and said, hey, listen, Sarge, I said, man, listen, I don't think you have bad intentions. You seem like a guy that like to make a lot of jokes, but I'd appreciate it if you stop making those kind of jokes with me because they make me feel real uncomfortable. That's all I said to the guy. Then he gives me I was on probation, gives me a bad review. They said they're going to terminate me. One officer's banging some lady inside personnel. She tells him, he tells me like, yo, you got to resign before they fire you. I go to the chief. The chief was like, yo, I like you, an excellent employee. Resign and I'm going to get you a job in another place. Same agency. This is the New York State Department of Mental Health and Hygiene. So I was going to be out of work for 3 months. He said it takes 3 months to reprocess you. 3 months. But I had to resign because if I got terminated paperwork, I'd never be able to work for the state again. So I go to social services because I have nothing. I use my money to fix my car. And I saw a lot of crazy shit, but that's not why I'm telling the story. There's a guy who went to Harvard. He had like a big time job in like private sector, but he lost his job. And people have their things like me. I spent my money to fix my car. I don't know what happened to his savings. I don't know what happened. Oh shoot, sorry, my fault.
I don't know what happened either.
I just fade. I pressed my my Atem Mini, the switcher, and it fade to black by accident. Dude, do you know what they did with that guy? They had a vacancy as the director of the organization. Me and him in the same welfare class. Like, it's like welfare to work. Like, even though they denied me, I didn't know I was denied. So I had to go. If you don't go to the welfare to work back then, like where they teach you how to do your resume on the computer and all that stuff, they don't want to let you stay home. Like, you had to go to these programs. You would get denied. So I don't know if I'm denied. I'm like, yo, I need this welfare for 3 months till I get a job, my new job working for the state again. They ended up denying me because I resigned. They said you had to get fired. So by resigning, I did not qualify for public assistance. So I wasted my time going to this program for like 2 months, right? So he's there with me. They made him the director of the organization, the not-for-profit that was running it. But that just show you, like, he had that pedigree. Like, these kids in Yale are like going crazy. It's like, dude, you're set for the rest of your life once you get that degree. It doesn't matter what your major was in, as long as it's like in medicine that requires specialized training. Somebody's going to say, because a person was able to get through Yale, get through Harvard, they're good enough to have the sense to make it through this job. I'm going to give them this job.
Right.
So, I mean, it is what it is, man. Long story, I just want to give you guys the ending of that story. I get into, I work for, I'm now working for the the new facility in mental health, and they're like, "Yo, you are an excellent worker. We believe you now." The chief of that area, that facility is like, "I believe you. I was a little skeptic. My colleague, who's my friend, told me to take you on, but I was a little skeptic that I was taking on a problem child. But I believe your story now because you're one of my best employees." Then from there, I went to corrections. And while I was in the academy for corrections, I got a call from the union saying they needed me to testify against that sergeant. And I was like, well, what happened? Because I didn't filing charges against him. He sexually harassed a female employee. And my wife was like, we have a new baby on the way. You don't know if he knows people. Just let it be. Just move on. So I told him I wasn't going to testify. Women tend to say stuff like that. I should have testified on his ass. But anyway, so I moved on with my life, but turns out they were going to terminate him, but due to union and state rules, he was able to retire before the termination process could go through. So he actually retired in shame because he did the same thing to a female that he was doing to me, but she had the courage to come forward. For me, it really wasn't courage. For me, it was like knowledge. I was still thinking street, like, let me confront this guy. But instead of doing that, she used the system in place and she was able to get his ass out of there. If I'd have did that, I would have never have to resign from my job. So just show you use the right way. Now, I didn't threaten this guy. I don't want to make it seem like I was a thug on this guy. I told him professionally what he should not say to me. But I should have used the system by filing a grievance against him, and things would have ended up much different than it did. But God is good, and look where I'm at now. So it's all good.
Yeah. So, guys, thank you for tuning in tonight. As always, a great conversation with Strategic Eyes. If there are even any V Radio subscribers out there who still have not subscribed to Strategic Eyes channel, please make sure that you do. He does great, fantastic work, and he's a great orator, man. I get to sit there listen to you rant for hours, bro.
Appreciate
this
you,
is
bro.
why I've been trying to say, man, you got to run for office.
Negative, bro.
That was something else. Yes, I know you're going to say that. I'm just going to put you on the ballot one day. It'll be a secret write-in. And you'll be like, wait a minute, what? I've been contacted about what? What do you mean I got elected?
I'm president?
I didn't run for that. But no, it honestly, dude, it's just, you're so genuine about it, and you understand all the different angles of it, and it's been fantastic. I love your content. I recommend you to everyone.
Right.
And it's part of it though, is you clearly have a natural talent though for communicating. That's why I tell you need to run for office, because people who have a soul and could also be good politicians are pretty hard to come by, right? Like every now and then I'll listen to Bernie Sanders and I'll get fired up. He knows what he's doing. I think he legitimately cares.
Right.
He's not alone. There are even right-winger politicians like Ron Paul, for example. I think he genuinely cares. I don't agree with everything he says, but the point is that, having people who actually have what I call give a shit factor is really important, and we don't have enough people like that. But in any case, thanks for tuning into V Radio tonight. You guys can also check out my stuff at hy.page/V Radio. There you can find me on Rumble. There you can find me on all of my other platforms, including Spotify, etc. And once again, Neo Unrealist, friend of the show, literally got deleted off of YouTube.
Terrible.
So check him out on Rumble, guys, because that is such crap. Neo Unrealist is a fantastic guy. He knows that I'm left-leaning. He's had me on his show so many times when I've gotten suspended. We covered the Darrell Brooks trial together. We covered some parts of the Kyle Rittenhouse trial together. He's also a New Yorker, Strategic. You should talk to him sometime. His channel got completely deleted, and it's one of my favorite channels on YouTube. He's over on Rumble now. I don't know if he'll get his channel back or not, because he's one of those guys who's been doing this for a long time, and he got stuck at 30,000 subscribers. And for some reason, no matter how many people I send over there, it never seems to go up. So, be sure to send some love to Neo Unrealist over on Rumble. And V Radio is also on Rumble and BitChute and Odyssey. Some of my stuff I can't even put up here, and I have to put it on BitChute or Odyssey. So, there's stuff that you could go watch over there that's exclusive to those mediums. And I'm on Twitch. I don't really have much of a following on Twitch. And I've been warned before that my kind of stuff gets people banned from Twitch, so I keep posting it there, but I don't really expect anything to happen with it. You're on a lot of mediums too, aren't you, Strategic?
Yeah, I'm in Rumble, Odyssey, Twitch. I do stream on Twitter as well. So if you follow me on Twitter, you can actually watch my live shows on Twitter. Yeah, Twitch is slow motion. It's automatic. Like right now we're streaming to Twitch. So whoever's interested can
Right.
watch it, whoever not. And if they say, hey, you're banned, who cares? We don't do nothing on Twitch anyway.
Right, exactly. So, all right, thanks again everybody for tuning in tonight. And Strategic, I'll talk to you briefly off the air after we go off live. I know you need to go. I am looking for future show topics. I'm sorry that we went so long without content. I'm in the middle of kind of a crazy moment of my son's life because he's an elite wrestler. He's undefeated. He's ranked number 4 in the state, and his season has been very rough. And I'm kind of been his coach since he was a little kid. It's something that he and I do together. We're planning on hopefully opening up a wrestling academy someday. So I got to help him navigate this, weather the storm, so to speak. And then there's a bunch of other kids that I mentor that are now all in high school too. That was actually something I got to do, was like one of them comes from one of these underprivileged communities, and my son and I would go help him get better at wrestling, and his high school coach was so cool that he would just let us show up and help this kid. And he just got a full ride scholarship, $40,000 a year scholarship, thanks to the work that we did to make him better at wrestling. It was a fantastic, awesome moment because he's such a good kid.
What's up?
But those kinds of things take some of my time, and that's why you've seen a little less of me lately, guys. So, but you'll be seeing more. If there's anything you want me to do a show about, obviously come to my Discord and tell me all about it. I'll be happy to help you. And I am still working on a documentary called OK Groomer, where I'm going to cover a whole lot of very controversial stuff that I probably am not even going to be able to put it on YouTube. I'm probably going to have to stick it on BitChute. But I'm going to put to bed a whole bunch of arguments about what's really going on with that situation. So be sure to check that out. I won't go into a bunch of details since we're simulcasting on the Strategic's channel too. I don't want him to get in trouble for anything I'm doing. Thanks again, folks. Take care.
Peace.